And we'll call our meeting to order. We appreciate your being here today as we conduct the business of the State Board. I think everybody by the noise level is feeling a little better today since we have some cool air.
Yeah.
And the promise of fall. It'll probably be hot again at some point, but at least we have the promise of fall, so we appreciate your being here. I would remind you to silence your cell phones, please, so that we are not disturbed during the proceedings. We are here. Dr. Dean was called out of town last night on business, so he is not with us today, but the rest of our board is here. I have asked Mr. Franklin if he will lead the pledge this morning, and Mr. Bailey if he will lead our invocation. So we ask that you stand with us, please.
Would you stand with me as we salute the flag and pledge our allegiance? I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Would you bow with me? Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the beauty of the day. Lord, we praise you for the freedoms that we have. Lord, we ask your blessings upon the leadership throughout this state, on the children throughout this state. May you bless that. Lord, we ask your leadership upon this meeting today. May decisions be made that are in the best interest of the children of Mississippi. And may we honor you in everything we say and do. For we say these things in your precious name. Amen.
Our first item for action is approval of the minutes of the September 14th, 2017 board meeting. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes as presented?
Oh, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the next item is approval of the agenda. You all have received a copy of the agenda. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda? Mr. Franklin.
make some changes, please, ma'am. On item number 5, I'll change that. I'd like to have these as action items, not just information items. And you and I talked about my issue about contracts, and we were going to put them somewhere, but that's also an
right. And
so I want to put the contract issuance on number 5 there.
Oh,
please.
You want to add that to it?
Yes, ma'am, please, instead of the other. You'd given another slot, but that's an information piece.
Yes,
also.
so that would become E.
Ma'am, please. And then one other question I want to ask is, are we going to discuss the peer and state auditor's report?
Yes, later.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Got it. It's number 6. Okay. If we could move on, with your permission, Chairman, if we could move item 6 up right after item 3.
That becomes 3A,
3B.
3B.
All right, hang on just a minute. Let me get this. All right, do you have something?
Our consent agenda move up to 3B.
No, number 6.
Number 6.
Right above the consent agenda. That's a new
7.
your main agenda there.
Main
Look.
agenda.
That's what I said. This is one I got.
Look at the one in your board book.
I got you. Yes.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I move that this become our working agenda with those changes.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. We have no recognitions today, so we will move to the report from the state superintendent.
Okay, very good. Well, good morning, everybody. It's been a rather busy month. I did have a couple of speaking engagements and other meetings as well. I was invited to attend the Southeast Comprehensive Center and Midwest Comprehensive Center Regional Institute. They were focusing on nurturing high-quality early learning and leadership across the pre-K to grade 3 continuum. And so it gave me an opportunity to be there to let them know what's happening in Mississippi. And I think everybody is always very excited to see all the wonderful things that are happening with our little ones. And hats off to all the teachers across the state that work with them. We are really looking to expand our look at early learning from birth to grade 3. These little ones come to us typically about 98 to 99% of all those children that are, even if they're in private daycare or private pre-K, they land on the public schools steps. So it's what can we do as public educators to get ahead of that curve and try to impact their lives from the moment they even leave the hospital. And we can talk about that a little bit later. And then yesterday, I was invited to the Council of Chief State School Officers. It's called Grant Makers for Education Conference. And it's a convening of large funders around the nation, and it gave me, as the incoming president of CCSSO, each president gets to select their platform of what they are going to be talking about for the entire year, and my platform is going to be around early childhood education and the importance of access and equity where that's concerned. So it gave me an opportunity to talk to funders around the nation about what we're doing in Mississippi, and my message was very clear. Even with all the challenges that we've got, we're doing amazing things for our young ones, and so if Mississippi can do this, any other state can do this, and we're talking about how we can work together to get this accomplished. I also did my presentation to the Legislative Budget Office. We gave our presentation around our budget requests, and my entire approach, Ms. Altman was with me that day, was about our return on investment. So if the legislators are giving us money, and what is their investment and what's been their return on their investment. So it gave me an opportunity to talk about not only the things that we're doing with our early learning collaboratives, but with our Literacy-Based Promotion Act, with our advanced placement, with CTE, all of those kinds of things that are happening in Mississippi and happening in a very good way. I also met with the Jackson Legislative Delegation regarding the JPS audit and felt that was a good conversation. Ms. Altman and I were also on Gallo, and I'm going to let her tell you about that. So it was the two of us going on Gallo, and it was really a great opportunity for some good exchange and good dialogue. So I always appreciate the opportunity that I have to do that. And that very night, I went on Tell John, which is Senator Horn's show in the evening. So he's got a radio show, and so I started out the morning with Gallo and ended up with Senator Horn. And we were talking about a lot of things, but primarily the audit with JPS. I also met with the Black Caucus to talk about not only the audit with JPS, but also upcoming legislation that might be pertinent to us in terms of education. Finished my first round with my teacher advisory committees, and those are always a high spot. We've expanded that group from about 50 to 60 to about 170, and so I still meet with them in the northern part, the center part, and the southern part of the state. And as I predicted, they kind of start out quiet initially. Some of them, this is the first time they've really interfaced with the state superintendent, but by the time the meeting is over, 2 hours later, they're all talking as fast as I am. So that's always good feedback for me. Superintendent's Advisory, we had our first one this month. And that's a good group of people to really hone in on and get advice from and bounce ideas off of. They are actually the people that are boots on the ground, as my teachers are, and so it's always helpful to meet with them. The ASD Planning Committee met, and I'm going to talk about that with my item that's coming up. And also we met with our Technical Advisory Council for 2 days, as we do periodically during the year, and that's always very helpful to go over our assessments, the upcoming alternate assessment for MAP for our little ones who have SCD, et cetera. The other thing that I want you to know is that we are also in the process, Mr. Franklin, to your point earlier, we're going to be discussing this. I have asked Ms. Amos's team, Sonia Amos, would you please stand, please? Sonia is the person who is in charge of our internal accountability and internal audit team. She has an amazing team. If any other members of her team, could you please stand if you're here? Very good. I really want to praise this group of people. They have been on an internal audit. And Dr. Gavin is going to be addressing more of this in her presentation, but I want to tell you how much I appreciate the work that you do. I appreciate the long hours that you've been putting in on this, and I know you're not done yet, but I'm very proud of this team, and I can honestly say this team is functioning exactly the way that this team was intended to function, which is an internal audit team that reports directly to the board, so you will be getting a report from these folks as soon as they're done, but thank you for your hard work. And I also then wanted to talk about our spotlight. So we always have spotlight. We didn't have one last month, but I'm excited we do this year. And this features the Starkville-Oktibbeha School District. They were consolidated in 2015, and the district had about a year and a half to get ready for the consolidation. And during that time, I can honestly say the district leaders, parents, and students all worked together to make this transition as smooth as possible. The community view the consolidation as an opportunity, which I think is powerful for both districts. And as a result, all students now have access to advanced coursework, honors programs, and more extracurricular opportunities. Unfortunately, we don't have guests from Starkville-Oktibbeha today, but this district is well represented in the video. So that's fine.
The bill to consolidate our school district was introduced in the state legislature in 2013, and the actual consolidation happened in July 2015. Prior to the official consolidation date of 2015, and throughout the process, the students in the county schools were allowed to come in and take some courses which weren't offered at their school. So that began that process of the students getting to work together and getting to know each other, and so that was one of the opportunities that was put into place for the students to begin making that adjustment.
My freshman year, we started hearing rumors about there could be consolidation and building the new partnership school and trying to help the county schools out because they had just gotten in bad situations over there. But we didn't think it would happen in our time. We thought it was, a couple years down the line, but then, we got to school, I guess my sophomore year, and they announced over the intercom that we would be consolidating, that we're going to start bringing in some of the county kids to try to kind of get them introduced into our system and how things work here. And then through student government, we also were able to meet with some of their students and some of the teachers that were coming here and just kind of acclimate them to our system and make sure they felt welcomed. And I thought it went fairly smoothly. I mean, considering you're bringing a couple new 100 kids in, I thought it went really well.
I became aware of the consolidation efforts actually by the legislature. So the legislature took steps to make a consolidation between Starkville and Oktibbeha County schools, primarily because the Oktibbeha County schools were not performing successfully or up to par with what the state expected them to do. And so there was a bill that was entered in the legislative session consolidating those two districts. I think everyone in the community viewed consolidation as an opportunity and one that we felt very strongly needed to happen. The how it was going to happen was really the part that was uncertain. One of the most unique results of the commission was the creation of this partnership school, the 6th and 7th grade school, where every student in Oktibbeha County will attend on the campus of Mississippi State University. That's never been done before in the state of Mississippi, and so it's a huge opportunity for our children to experience a unique classroom setting on a college campus. But it also proves, I think, the collaborative nature of this consolidation process.
When I first heard the consolidation was going to happen, I was all in for it because I knew I would have a better education and I would be exposed to more things. I'm taking all honors and AP classes, and I think what I like about that because I could take all my college classes here. And when I start college, I'll be a junior actually.
Well, now I do feel like we do have more options at the school now that we have a bigger population. So now there are more classes, more AP classes, more honors classes, and there's just a better opportunity for us to get involved. When we started consolidation, I was a freshman, so I was new to the high school experience too, and the classes that we may have. And for both of us, it was a much better experience because now that we both have an opportunity to have advanced classes, AP classes, we can have a chance to graduate with honors, dual enrollment, the Merit Scholars Program. We have different options to graduate with and a better education now.
I was kind of nervous about it because, you know, coming from a small school like 1A to a 6A school, it was going to be a big change. And, you know, the county school was like small and it was just like family at the county school, but here it's like more diverse. Coming from a 1A school to a 6A school in sports, it was really challenging. Like in the 1A, we played, but it wasn't as hard as 6A. Like it's more competition and things like that, but it helped me get better in sports.
I forget some students came from the county because we're all so close now, especially since I met them in 8th grade, so they've been with me for 2 years, now I'm a sophomore. So sometimes I'm just like, oh yeah, you just think that they've been here for a while and I don't really notice it anymore.
Well, I'm a product of the district, so I remember it before consolidation. And I know that there was a lot of anxiety with consolidation, maybe you know, children not getting along and things of that nature. But it has been an absolute success. I think that there's just one Jacket family now, and that children are able to get along and learn together and grow together, and I think the community is better for it. I think the administration took a great deal of time organizing, planning meetings, getting community involvement, even having meetings outside of the district into the county, where there was total buy-in. So I think when the transition happened, it was a high level of comfort when it finally came to fruition.
I think as a community, we now have one school district that we champion, that we cheer for, and it really gives us all a sense of pride and also of community, that all of our children are together in this, and we as a community are extremely supportive of that as well.
You know, this really does prove what's possible when you are consolidating districts, and I've got to say hats off to both Starkville and Oktibbeha, because they are really now the model that we keep referring to about how smoothly this went, because they came together in the best interest of children and started working very hard in the best interest of children. And I think this speaks volumes about what can happen if you just keep kids at the center of everything that you're doing. And Madam Chairman, that concludes my remarks.
Madam Chairman, can we get a little bit more oxygen in the room?
Yeah. Can we open the doors or turn the
Yeah.
air conditioner on or something? It is hot in here.
They are working on it. Is it broken? Oh,
Maybe.
Lord.
Maybe.
Get that look that says, don't ask anymore. Okay.
I might add to the Starkville story that Dr. Passant, who is the superintendent of the Starkville schools, was trained in Clinton as an administrator, so we know he's going to be successful. But that is a good story, and we're proud of him and look forward to what he's going to be able to do there. As Dr. Wright said, I attended the budget hearing with her, the LBO, and what she didn't say was that her report was very well received, and I got text after it was over saying how impressed they were with the manner in which the report was given. The first 16 pages were the successes of the allocations they had made in early childhood or the other programs that they had funded. So it was and in fact, I got a text from one of the leadership that said, most impressive that we've heard from any agency. So I think that was certainly spoke volumes of the work that the department put into it and the manner in which it was presented. I also was on the Gallo show with her early in the morning, and he asked some really piercing, probing questions, and but was very complimentary of what's going on, but he didn't back off of any issue that we are dealing with. I spoke also to the Clinton retired educators this week, and the one thing that I brought away from that meeting is, although they're all retired, they've taught in all across central Mississippi and even in other states, they still have a passion for education, and they ask a lot of questions. They were very much interested in what's going on around the state, and still have a interest in students learning, what students are doing in the classroom, and many of them actually serve as tutors or readers or whatever in our local school district. I also spoke to the Optimist Club, which meets at 6:30 a.m. on a Friday morning. Wow. Only an optimist would do that, as I tell them. But anyway, I spoke with them too, and just a general discussion of the things that are going on here in the department. They're a group of businessmen who meet before work, and they too were very interested in what's happening in education. Of course, these are the people they hire. This is their workforce, and so they were pleased to hear of the work that's going on in workforce training. They were asking questions about, of course, the accountability and scores, and of course, we're very concerned about what the scores were going to be for the local district. So anyway, there are a lot of people out there who, although they may not be actively involved every day in education, they're very much concerned, very much interested, and want to be a part of it as much as they can be. So that's what I've done this last month. Do we have?
Get any promise of money?
No.
Bill meeting?
No. Nope. No, they didn't get that far into it. But I do understand that much of the information that she presented during the course of the hearing has been used in speeches around the state. I've gotten reports back from that. So obviously it was good information. Subcommittee meetings, I know accountability met this morning.
We did meet this morning, and the focus of our conversation this morning was the assignment of the performance classifications of all of the districts around the state.
Any other? Dr.
The Academic Achievement Committee met, which includes Mr. McClellan. And during that meeting, we learned about all the great conferences and training sessions that Dr. Benton and her staff have recently conducted. And they shared with us some of the very highly complimentary comments from the attendees at these conferences and training centers. So I would sum that up with saying that the academic achievement staff are really putting forth some great, outstanding results in their work. Secondly, we discussed the school improvement grants, which commonly referred to as SIG grants. We were looking at the results of the competitive round 3 and final round of these grants. And I will leave it at that. It's very exciting news that they have to present to you, but since they did all the work, I will leave that to them, which they will present later in the agenda.
Thank you. Any other report? All right, then we'll move into our agenda items. The first one is, excuse me, update on the Office of Operations reorganization. This is Dr. Gavin, and this is your orange folder that you have at your places.
Morning. When I was initially hired by Dr. Wright, she charged me with looking at every aspect that was under the Chief of Operations purview, and that included accounting, procurement, and basically the overall structure of the operation area in general. And Dr. Wright was very aware that there were some operational issues and some weaknesses in our internal controls that really needed to be addressed. So she charged me with looking at all those areas and to come back with her come back to her with a recommendation. And that's what I have done. I presented her with several recommendations, and she immediately told me to go forth and start implementing some of those changes. So I want to present to you today some of the changes that we have implemented, as well as some of the changes that are forthcoming. Of course, in all of our presentations, we include our vision and our mission statement, as well as our goals for the Mississippi Department of Education. But the first area that I want to address is internal controls and compliance. We hired a compliance manager in May of 2017 to serve as an independent and an oversight role. And the person that we selected for that position, she is certified. She was a certified public accountant, so she has years of experience in the area of internal audit as well as compliance. And having worked many years myself in an environment that is heavily regulated, one of the key missing functions that I noted in my assessment to Dr. Wright was we did not have one person dedicated to the area of compliance. So even though every office was looking at that, we did not have one specific person that was looking at compliance with all of our state and federal laws. And I thought that was important because the agency is responsible for just this next year. We oversee $835 million in federal dollars, as well as $2.5 billion in state funds. So I thought it was very important that we had a person focused to make sure that we were in compliance with all state and federal laws as it relates to. Just in total, $835 million approximately for the next fiscal year. And some of the key areas of focus that our compliance manager is reviewing, she reviews the previous audit findings for compliance with our corrective action plans. Anytime we're issued an audit, we have to respond with a corrective action plan. So her task there is to follow up to make sure that every office is in compliance with what they said they were going to do in terms of their corrective action plan. We're also required to complete an annual internal control assessment that is required by the Department of Finance and Administration. And that entails going through a series of questions, answering the question whether we're in compliance with several areas of compliance. She is also tasked with working with our leadership and program offices to identify and monitor risks that could impact the agency internal control system. So that's been trying to be proactive instead of waiting for issues to arise. She's looking at opportunities to identify any potential risks. She will work with our grants management team to ensure that we're in compliance with federal and state laws. As I mentioned, we're in charge of a lot of state dollars and federal dollars, so she is going to be tasked with looking at that. And you'll hear more about the grants management team later in my presentation. Other areas of focus, she will perform random reviews of accounts reconciliations or documents to ensure that our revenue and expenditures are being properly recorded. She will ensure that all contracts are in compliance with state and federal guidelines. That's working with the Office of Procurement and myself. And she will also work with the procurement and accounting staff to ensure that we follow the Mississippi Agency Accounting Policies and Procedures as outlined by the Department of Finance and Administration. The next area is the accounting reorganization. When I first arrived here, like I said, one of my tasks was to review this area in particular because Dr. Wright did have concerns that there were some weaknesses in this area. So I hired an accounting director in May, and she has over 15 years of experience, some in the private sector as well as the public sector. She has a master's degree in accounting, so she's very qualified in that area. And we reorganized the structure of the Office of Accounting to streamline the reporting structure and to establish some clear lines of responsibilities. There were several layers when I got here, so we streamlined that process. So there's clear lines there. The office is structured where there's 3 functional directors reporting to the Office Director of Accounting. We realigned the purchasing function to the Office of Procurement. Before I got here, that particular function resided in the area of accounting. So I thought it would be prudent for us to move that function to the Office of Purchasing. So you have all of contracts under one office, and there's a clear separation of duty between purchasing and accounting. We consolidated the accounting and budget staff into one area. Those two teams work hand in hand. So they were in 2 physically different locations. So I thought it was important that we put those offices in the same area so that the communication there would be good. We also contracted with Cornerstone to develop some written procedures and policies. We understand what we do in that area, but we have, we didn't have a concise document with all of our written policies and procedures. And you will see, I'm sure you've seen that in some of our previous audits, that we have policies, but those policies and procedures were not in writing. So we're actually scheduled to get a draft of that document from Cornerstone at the end of this month. Right off the top of my head, I don't remember. We can get that information for you. Some of the other changes that we've made are in the area of procurement. And I think this area is important because there's a lot of misinformation surrounding our procurement practices here at the agency. So we've made several changes. We've implemented the new contract worker application process as we presented to this board, I think last fall. So we've implemented those changes that we presented to you. And some of those key changes for the contract workers include, we're requiring an RFA for contracts between $5,001 between that and $75,000. We also, we have a request for application or a competitive sealed application for all contracts that are over $75,000. And again, all contracts in excess of $70,000 must be approved by PSCRB. And then per our own internal policies, all contracts in excess of $50,000 are approved by this board. And as of July 1st, we have eliminated the pool of service as a method of procurement of contracts. I think that is probably one of the miscommunications out there. We have eliminated the pool of services as a means of procuring any type of services with MDE, and that was for any contracts that went into effect July 1st of this year. We've revised our contract procurement policy effective May of 2017, and some of those key changes to the independent contractor workers include, we now require 2 written quotes, or they can use the pre-approved vendor list for contracts between $5,001 and $50,000. And once we get above $50,000, we require 3 written quotes or a sealed qualification, or they can use the pre-approved vendor list for contracts, again, that are between $50,000 and $75,000. One of the operational changes that we've implemented is we've created a contract transmittal form. That form includes my signature as the Chief of Operation. It includes the Procurement Director's signature. So it's attached to all contracts prior to being placed on the SBE board agenda. That way, my office is very well aware of any contracts that come before you and that they have followed the proper procedures as it relates to procuring any contracts. We also have required the chiefs of any of those program offices that are submitting contracts, that chief must sign off on the justification for those contracts. So any contract that comes before you, you will have the confidence to know that it's been approved and has been looked at and reviewed by the chief of that office, as well as your procurement office and myself. And you will see later on as we get into the contracts, we've created a contract summary sheet for all the contracts that are presented to you, so you can have one look at any contracts that we're presenting to you. You have a comprehensive list that you can see, and we've kind of included several headings to kind of answer some of the questions that you may have. And then there's some information that's forthcoming in store effective January 1st, 2018. Upon the guidance from DFA, we will implement House Bill 1106 and 1109. And we've not received the guidance on that yet, but we do know that that's coming into effect January 1st of 2018. Some of those changes include, right now we can, as an agency, you can go out and solicit, you can go out and issue an RFP. One of the key changes is you're going to be required to get approval from the new board, and PSCRB will be eliminated. They're rolling basically under the Department of Finance and Administration's purview. But we will have to seek prior approval to even issue an RFA. So that's going to extend the amount of time that it takes for us to issue contracts and to go through that process. It's just adding, another layer to that process. And I think now you have the liberty to advertise for 14 days. They're going to change that to 30 days. We're going to be required to advertise for 30 days. And then also one of the things is price will be at least 35% of the calculation when you're calculating the scores. Okay. And the area of grants management, we requested from the State Personnel Board to establish a new grants management department. I brought to you several months ago a position for someone to lead that area. So the purpose of that office is to provide oversight and accountability of all federal funds and management of all the grants within the agency. As it stands right now, every program office has their own method of handling grants and handling grants. So we're going to create this grants management team so we have one consistent way that we're submitting grants and working through that process. And some of their roles and responsibilities will be to develop a grants management handbook to ensure that there is consistency across all programs office and that we're functioning under one policy as it relates to grants management. And one of the things that we've seen in a couple of our audits is we need to establish one grants management system. We have 2 or 3 different systems that we're working from. So this team will recommend and we will implement one grants management system. And they will also perform grant reconciliations and do all the fiscal reviewing of the fiscal monitoring findings. And they will also provide training on specific program issues. And then again, they're accountable for all the fiscal requirements and reporting. As I mentioned, we have, in close to $1 billion, $835 million in terms of federal dollars that flow through this agency. And that concludes my report. Questions?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Frank.
Back to the procurements. Difference between the pool of folks versus this?
The pool of service was something internal with MDE. The preferred pre-approved vendor list is a list that's on the Department of Finance and Administration's website, and it's not just for this agency, it's for all state agencies.
Mr. McClellan?
Would it be a fair statement to say, based on your presentation, the last stop for paying would be with you, is that correct?
The last stop for paying?
Yeah, for the payment going out for a contract or whatever, the last stop is with you?
Yes, the Office of Accounting.
Is it a fair statement to say that before you put this in place, that there could have been instances where it fell through the crack prior to getting to you as far as approving a grant or a contract? Now, am I making myself clear?
State your question for me.
Is it a fair statement to say, prior to this reorganization that you are presenting to us, that it could have been instances where there was contracts signed that did not go through the proper procedure prior to getting to you?
Well, I can't really speak to what happened before I got here, but
let's just take for your position then.
As I pointed out in my presentation, one of the first things that was told to me when I got here by Dr. Wright was she recognized that there were some internal control weaknesses in the area. And I think you will see in some of the audits that you've probably already received that they've cited us for instances where there were some material weaknesses. So what we're doing here is trying to address some of those issues and by putting these policies in place.
Is it going to be the person that you just hired? Is that person, would that person be the one to be the person to do the catch-all prior to getting to you?
Well, accounting would be the last stop. Accounting is tasked with paying the invoices, and before it gets to accounting, there are several layers of review that should take place before it gets to accounting. And as you said, accounting is the last stop before the payment actually goes out the door. But as I pointed out here, contracts are going to be reviewed by me. They're going to be reviewed by the procurement director, and they're also going to be reviewed by the chiefs of those areas. And accounting, some of the policies that we're revising is, accounting is responsible for making sure that any payment that goes out, that there's proper documentation that shows that we've received those goods and services.
The compliance person that you've hired, though, would be the person who would review the whole document and make certain that any state law, federal law, any requirements of what, have been met prior to it moving on into accounting. Is that your question that you're asking?
That's the question.
The compliance manager.
Yes.
Or moving to you or to your position, that person would be responsible to do all of the catch-alls prior to getting to you to sign off for to be paid or whatever.
That is correct, but the procurement director also has a role in that, and coming behind the procurement director, the compliance manager will also be looking at that, and then it's presented to me. When it's presented to me, the procurement director has signed off stating that this contract is okay for you to sign because I have reviewed it and it follows all of our internal policies as well as state laws. And there's a transmittal sheet with that signature on it before it comes to me, so that I have a level of comfort that she has done her due diligence.
I have one other question, and I'm finished. Some years ago, Dr. Burnham's last thing here, we moved from $25,000 to $50,000 without having to come to the board for approval. What is the difference in this $75,000? And I know that probably is a simple answer, probably is a simple question. But what is the difference in this $75,000 and this $50,000 window?
The $50,000,
the $50,000 window that we have that do not have to come to the board for approval.
The 0 to 50, is that what you're asking?
0 to 50. On the $75,000, can you explain to me what is the difference in this procurement over here on the $75,000 request for application for the RFA? Am I being confused?
Slide are you on, Mr. McClellan? What's the number?
On page 11.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So on any contracts between $5,000 and $75,000, they're required for an RFA. In any contract, $50,000 or more would come to you for approval.
Right.
But if it's $60,000, that contract does not have to go to PSCRB. But when it gets to $75,000, it has to go to PSCRB. So your threshold is $50,000. PSCRB's threshold is $75,000. And anything under that, we still have a competitive process. It just does not have to come to you for approval, but it goes through a competitive process.
Is any of that, excuse me, just a minute, is any of that set by DFA, or is this just internal?
Yes, part of it is anything $5,000 or more has to be competitively bid.
Right. Okay. Mr. Franklin.
The procurement director currently reports to the chief of operations. That's me.
Donna Hales is no longer in charge of procurement.
She's not procurement anymore.
She's on Sonia's team on internal accountability. No.
So that leads into my question. I have two questions, but I'll go with that one first. At what point, or is there any point where our accountants, when I say our, I mean Sonia's staff, does any of this pass through her office?
Internal audit is a separate function. They don't get involved in the day-to-day process of issuing contracts. They're more project specific. If there's something that Dr. Wright or you as a board want them to look at, along with their list of required audits that they do, I mean, they can't get involved they can't be a part of the day-to-day decision making. That will take them out from being unbiased when they go to conduct their internal audit. If they've worked in the trenches beside us doing this work, their role is to look at the work once it's been completed and to make an independent assessment of it after that.
Okay, once the work is completed, is that after the contract has been let?
That is correct. But that's what that's why we're hiring a compliance manager. That person will look at it on the front end to make sure that all of our I's are dotted and T's are crossed. She's a part of that process on the front end, but you can't have internal audit performing an independent function and yet they're in the work day to day. They would be part of the decision-making process at that point if you want them to be independent. So that work comes after the work is complete. They would audit the work, so they can't audit the work if they're actually in the trenches doing the work.
Let me make a comment on that, if you don't mind.
Sure.
The internal audit committee, which Ms. Amos oversees, every year come to the accountability committee with a group of audits that they would like to do internal audits on. That comes to you for approval. It also goes to Dr. Wright. At any point that this board wants something audited within the department, then you can bring it to the accountability committee, and then we would push it over to the accountability committee, and then it would come back up to the board for approval, and the audit will be done.
Is that the way that's always been done?
It's been that way for the last 3 or 4 years. If you recall, when we hired Ms. Amos, we said that we wanted her division to be independent, report directly to the board.
Her position is supposed to be that way.
It is that way, and that's why we approve all of the audits that is done by that department. But it hadn't always worked that way. We started that with Ms. Amos when Ms. Amos was hired.
Okay.
You say we is referring to the board?
The board.
That started about 4 years ago. It was about 4 years.
Have we had any of those audits come before the board?
Tanya, do you want to address that? Why don't you come up to the table? Talk a little bit about your function and what you've done, because your team has done a lot of work.
Yes, ma'am. The board policy requires the accountability director to present the reports, the audit reports, to the accountability
What?
subcommittee
Of the board.
Of the board serves as the audit committee.
What report?
Internal audit reports go directly to the accountability.
Let me back up. I think I have confused, or either I'm confused. You're saying that your guidelines tell you to go directly to the accountability subcommittee?
The state board policy requires that my work is approved by the accountability subcommittee. They serve as the audit committee for the department, for the state board. That was in place when I came in, those board policies.
I'm not sure the subcommittee can approve that. The board have to approve that, don't they, Dr. Kelly?
That is not the policy of the department.
I don't think the subcommittee should be the one to give sole total. I think this board should be the one to do that. Now, I may be wrong.
Well, it does come to the board.
I've never, that's what I'm saying. I don't ever recall, maybe so, but I don't ever recall approving any audits that were coming from it.
Board policy requires the audit committee to approve the internal audit reports, and that has been in place for many years before I came into play. The subcommittee reports up to the board. Each time an audit report is presented to the subcommittee, and that's been spread upon the minutes each time a report has been presented. We have a list of all audit reports that have been prepared, and they are available for board review upon request, of course. We have probably completed 16 to 20 internal audit reports in the last few years, and we actually provided those to the auditor's office this summer when they came to the department to perform an audit of our audit reports. So,
you have never come in and presented those audit reports.
Ended the accountability. You said subcommittee account.
Right.
It's accountability, not audit. Subcommittee.
Board policy was in place when I was hired, and the protocol is set in board policy that the audit reports are presented to the accountability subcommittee, which serves as the audit committee for the board. Yes.
You ever presented an audit report to the full board?
reports from external entities to the board. We presented the CLA financial and federal audit report back in the spring to the board. So we have presented reports to the board.
On the accountability subcommittee, Dr. Kelly does, you chair it, right?
Present time, I chair it. Mr. Bailey is a part of it, and the chair of the board is also part of it. Would you like to be a part of it?
No, I'm not. No. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it seems to me that you three people seem to you're in the loop of what's going on, but we three people are kind of out here in the wind whipping around because I don't recall seeing the audit reports.
Well, every time the audit committee has brought a report to us, since I've been chair, and Miss Altman did the same thing. She tells the board earlier this morning we heard from an internal audit, and that's what it involved. And then at that point, some of them have come before the board, and as Ms. Amos said, we've had 3 or 4 to come before the board in the last 3 or 4 years.
Now, because the other thing you might want to explain is about your annual plan, because you have an annual plan of what you intend to do.
I came to the department in this position. We did not have an annual plan coming before the subcommittee from the audit department, from the audit function, and I thought it was very important that this position prepare a plan and have it approved annually by the subcommittee, which serves as the audit committee. And that has come before the subcommittee annually, and they have reported back to you that they have approved that plan. We have also reached out to the board members for ideas, you'll probably remember that, and suggestions on what you would like to see audited. We did that around a year ago, and some members responded and some didn't, but we wanted your feedback on areas of interest or areas that you thought were at risk, so we could develop the plan based upon your input as well as based upon the department leadership input. Our plan is developed based upon audit risk because with our small staff, we can't audit every activity of the department, but we take into account internal control weaknesses that we are aware of. We take into account any risks that we are aware of from external audit reports, and we take into account input from department leadership as well as the board when we develop that annual plan.
Hey, maybe to keep everybody in the loop, once you've done your annual plan and presented it to accountability and they've signed off on it or whatever, then maybe your plan you push out to the whole board.
Great idea. You could do that.
So that
I think we saw that.
I'm sorry?
I think we saw that.
Yeah, we've gotten it, but I didn't know if
seen that.
everybody remembered it. So just a FYI. Yeah.
I haven't had any requests from any board members to review any reports that haven't been shared or any requests for any additional information. So I think I'm trying to keep you updated, but if you have any requests, please let me know because I hope you'll all agree that I'm very attentive to your request.
I would suggest, Sonia, that you send them a copy of every internal audit you have done.
Okay.
And let them see the list. And if you want to see the entire document, then those should be for your review as well.
It's been maybe a year, maybe not quite a year, that I remember you sending out the request for us to tell you what you'd like to. Maybe last spring you did that, something like that. Yeah.
Our plan, and we have a timeline that we live by in producing the internal audit reports. We also serve as a liaison for every external audit entity that comes into the department, and at last count I think we've had 8 external audits in the last year, and so that keeps our team very busy as well, making sure that every request that is made by every external audit team is met timely so that we can get them what they need and they can get their work done.
Bailey?
I think it might be helpful to reflect in that communication the times that you have presented to the board on audit reports at that time, just a reminder of those times that it has become before the board, and then any other questions that they may have related to that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, Dr. Gavin, any other questions for Dr. Gavin?
I have one.
Dr. Elam?
This establishment of a new grants management department, is that going to require a new PIN, or are you going to just shift people around?
It does not require any additional staff. What we're doing is we're taking the fiscal people from all the different program offices and combining them under one umbrella entitled the Grants Management Team. And that work will be overseen by somebody that's currently on staff.
So to sum up, you've moved procurement and purchasing and accounting all under one umbrella, all under your direction. Am I right on that? No.
Yes. Yes. We've combined the purchasing function under procurement so that you have all the procurement and purchasing under the procurement director, so that there's a clear separation of duty between accounting and purchasing. You don't have a director that's responsible for purchasing as well as doing the accounting and paying the bills. We've also created the grants management team who will oversee the grants management team as well as the budget function for state dollars and the accounting function.
I think that it would be helpful to all of us, well, I'll just speak for myself, it would be helpful to me if at our next meeting you present briefly, doesn't have to be like this, an organization chart. You've got so many arms going out, and you have a definite terminology one uses in accounting, and you sometimes lose me where you're going with it. So,
yeah, so
it would be helpful to
chart,
just see an organization chart of
that's
your
not
new
bad.
organization.
Mr. Franklin has a question.
Had the director of procurement yet?
Yes, sir. We've hired the director of procurement. I believe she came to the board in May or June for your approval.
Okay, any other questions of Dr. Gavin? Thank you. Very good report. We appreciate the work you're doing. All right, Dr. Gavin, you get to do the next one too. Item 2 is MDE contracts. Dr. Gavin and Dr. Benton.
Okay, you have before you 2 items for approval under contracts. The first item being monthly contracts with former state employees receiving retirement benefits. The second item is contract with the school improvement coaches. And of note there, I know you will see some of their names on item A and B, but that is only for one contract. We're just required to report the monthly contracts of any state employees that are receiving retirement benefits. So those are not 2 separate contracts. They're the same contracts, just listed in 2 different places. And you will also see what, as I mentioned earlier, the long legal sheet that you have in your package. That is a summary of all of the contracts that are coming before you, so that you can see who the awardee is. You can see if how many people responded to the contract, if they're a Mississippi vendor, do they have another contract, do they have an existing contract. All that information is there for your review to kind of help answer some of the questions that you may have as it relates to our contracts.
If I understand correctly, this will be a monthly insertion, if you
Yes,
would,
ma'am.
in our board packet.
It will be.
Get this every month. So
Felt that this was a good way to make all the contracts more transparent,
Right.
and also to allow the board the opportunity for any discussion regarding any of these contracts. So that's the reason that Dr. Gavin put together the cover sheet, if you will, so that you can very clearly see what's happening with each individual contract.
That'd be very helpful.
yeah.
Okay. And then, of course, the detail is behind your tabs. But again, this is a summary so that you can see the complete list of contracts that we're recommending to be awarded.
Questions on this? All right, let's move to item 3.
Ma'am.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Dr. Benton, would you explain that to us again from yesterday? You know, I'm just teasing.
Wait,
We in our academic subcommittee meeting
You're not
yesterday, she
having
went
a-
over this, and she had the hand motions and everything else, didn't she, Mr. McCullough? I just thought that would be fun for everybody to get to see what we saw yesterday.
I'm just pleased that I did an effective job and you grasped all that. That's good. That's
go.
good.
he remembered it.
Good response, yeah.
Okay, moving to item 3.
Item 3, we have one grant that we're bringing before you for approval, the school improvement grant. And again, also the first sheet behind there, we're taking the same approach so that you can see in summary all the grants that we're recommending for approval. And this particular month, it's only 2, but going forward, however many grants that we're recommending for approval, you will have a summary list of that with the detail following that as well. So basically the same format, similar questions to the contract summary. And the grant that we're bringing forth for you today, Dr. Benton will share information with you on that.
Dr. Benton?
Yes. The competition for the School Improvement Grant Fund, and we call it the SIG grant, the 1003G dollars, is governed by federal regulations and carried out under our state procurement procedures that Dr. Gavin outlined earlier. The 1003G School Improvement Grant Funds that you have before you, as just a reminder, these are the competitive grant funds that are available to eligible schools and there we had approximately 100 of those that have both the capacity and the need to carry out the selected intervention, and that's very prescriptive per the federal guidelines. It's important to note, though, that all of our focus and priority schools, those are our federally identified lowest performing schools in the state, also receive a formula appropriation, if you will, or allocation to specifically address deficiencies in student performance. So let me just be clear with that. Every school that is low performing school has the opportunity for those, and it's through the federal process, federal funds to support their interventions for students. After the evaluation process that we followed with the Office of Procurement for the competitive funds, 2 schools you have before you addressed all the required components within the application and met the criteria that was approved by the Federal Department of Education. The awardees presented this morning will increase our cohort of SIG grant recipients to 10. Ed will provide further guidance in the forms of any funds that may remain at the end of each year for carryover, or in the event that a grantee did not meet their outcomes or for whatever reason was discontinued, then we'll receive guidance from Ed how to use those. This was the last year of appropriation of this federal pot of dollars. As an agency, we continually review our assessment data, and you'll be hearing about that in just a few minutes. But I wanted to share with you the impact that a return on investment, following the theme that Dr. Wright laid out with the Legislative Budget Office of where we are. Just a sneak preview of that. Last year, you may recall that we had a number of schools that were identified for F with an F rating. 92 of those schools, district level teams, along with the school level leadership and the local school board president, participated in a plan development process with MDE representatives and a dialogue, if you will, about what are you doing, what does the data tell you in your school, and about student outcomes and how are you targeting your resources. And what I am proud to share with you today, that of those 92 school and district teams that came and participated in that process in December and January, 60 of those 92 schools are no longer rated on the as an F on the accountability results that you'll hear later today. Now, that's a return on investment. That's 66% of those schools. In terms of our SIG results since 2010, we had 3 previous cohorts of SIG recipients. In the first cohort, there were 8 awardees. 75% of those schools in 2010 that were awarded are no longer rated F. In the cohort 2, 50% of the schools are no longer rated F. In cohort 3, 50% of the schools are no longer rated F. So schools and districts are making progress as we strive diligently to realize Goal 6 put forth by the State Board of Education.
Thank you. That's great news.
Great news.
Wonderful news. Any questions on this? Any comments for Dr. Gavin or
Lots of money to little small. Like one of these schools has 130 kids, and they're getting hundreds of thousands of dollars. Well, we've got mucho number of districts that are, schools that are F, there also were 22 applications for these funds.
Well, it takes local initiative to get out there and do it. And that's where the disconnect is in the local district not applying. Okay, well, good.
I would like to comment that publicly, when we went through this yesterday, that a lot of effort was put into assisting those 22 applicants and trying to get them up to speed to meet the, to meet the federal guidelines. I think that I think Dr. Benton and her staff worked as hard as they could to get more schools eligible in the sense that they completed the application correctly. And since they didn't, we can't ask Dr. Benton and her staff to disobey the federal rules for these grants. I mean, it is what it is, and I'm sure that they're thinking hard about other ways they can help schools the next time around, or districts, but they did what they could with the resources they had this time.
And, you know, I failed to recognize the person that's been doing so much work in this effort. And I think Dr. Robertson, Dr. Robertson, if you'd stand up. Yes. She's been working really great leadership. And that's why I wanted to give you a little glimpse of that we're moving in the right direction. Much work to be done, but we're moving in the right direction. So thank you for that.
Okay, we did add 3B to this, and it's item 6 that's under your tab, under tab 6 in your agenda. So we will move to that now.
Sure. As you know,
thank you, ladies.
The statute 371717 created the opportunity for Mississippi to create an achievement school district. Part of the criteria of that was that we as an agency needed to design and prioritize criteria for identifying districts that would be put into the achievement school district. Part of the state statute lists some of that criteria. We have an Achievement School District Planning Committee that has been meeting on a monthly basis, and so we wanted to present to the board that work group's recommendation regarding criteria for districts that could be identified as a district to be included in the ASD. So the first two bullets that you have underneath that, which is the Mississippi Achievement School District shall only take over the number of districts for which it has the capacity to serve, and districts must have been identified as an F district for 2 consecutive years or 2 out of the 3 consecutive years. Those two bullets are right out of the statute. So those are the criteria that we list first, and that's listed in the statute. The next bullet, the third bullet, is really one that we lifted out of the accreditation standards, which, no, I back up. It's another piece of the statute, which is, okay, Erin, you correct me if I'm wrong, 3717-612B. All right. So that one comes out of that statute, which says that 50% or more schools are rated as an F. So within one district, you would be looking at 50% or more schools rated as F. And or there was a discussion amongst the committee around looking at the size of the population. So you may have a district that has a lot of its children in F schools, even though not all of the schools might be F. So another consideration, that's the reason they said and or, would be 50% or more of the schools in the district are rated as an F. So you're looking at where you've got large populations of children that are already in F schools. The other part of conversation that came up is what you see there that says note. And we were talking about, for the purpose of identification, districts in the process of being consolidated will be considered to have the higher of the grades of the districts being consolidated based on the most recent results consistent with the effective date of the consolidation. Meaning, if I've got a C district that is consolidating with an F district, we are giving the consolidation the benefit of the C rating rather than just automatically not trying to average it or whatever. That we felt that if you've got to give the districts that are being consolidated an opportunity opportunity to succeed. And so we felt, in fairness to them, if you've got a C district that's absorbing an F district, it's really not fair to both of those districts to view them as just F, but to give them the benefit of the doubt, hold the higher of the two grades in terms of consolidation. Now, if you've got two F districts being consolidated, then that's a pretty clear-cut example. But a lot of our districts that are being consolidated do have two distinctly different grades. And so that was a consideration that the committee felt very important to note. So we're bringing this to you today for action. And then the committee, once the criteria are approved, then the committee will then take the accountability results that are going to be given to you today, and then start looking to make some recommendations around which districts we're coming to you to recommend to be included in the Achievement School District.
So, well, go ahead. Your question may be mine.
I ask you, why was this not included in our packet? Or did I get?
Now, I have no idea. I don't know why it wasn't. But we just met, and that could be a reason too, Mr. Franklin, because the committee just met last Wednesday, and so that could be it too. But what you've got here is already in statute. Bullets 1, 2, and 3 are in statute. So the only consideration really is bullet 4.
50%
The
or more
50% or more students in a school rated as an F, because the other 3 are already in statute.
When we vote on this, we're going to vote on all 3.
Oh yeah, the criteria are
6 with 3. When we vote this afternoon, will we be voting?
Voting on this as a standalone item.
We moved it up to 3.
Yes.
So will we be voting on this as number 3?
3B, I think we retitled it 3B.
Yeah, so the question would be, if we vote on item 3, we're voting on A and B. Or, yeah, I mean, that would be how we normally would do it, unless somebody wants to break it out and say we only vote on
I guess what I'm saying, though, we moved it up to 3, right?
Yes, sir, we did.
So we will be voting on all 6 with 3.
Yes, yes.
Yes, sir.
What I'm
Yes,
asking.
yes, sir. 3B, right.
We're sort of on the same plane here.
Yeah.
Yes, it'll be all under item 3. My question, or my comment, just for verification, on assigning the higher grade to 2 schools there, then that grade would stand for a year until the new test results came out and the accountability.
Yeah, we really wouldn't, it's not like assigning the grade, it's a consideration.
I mean, a consideration,
And so what we're saying is then give that district an opportunity to consolidate and then to see what their grade assignment would be. And then they would fall into all other districts are considered.
All right, Dr. Elam.
Based upon what 3A is versus what 3B is, I mean, it's very, very separate issues. Compared to the SIG, I think they better be separated out for voting.
It doesn't fall under grants. We just gave it B because it moved up to 3 and we already had a 3A. So yeah, good point.
Separate voting. But before we leave the discussion of the Achievement School District, can you give us an update on how your recruiting is going for superintendent?
Well, we haven't started that yet. You remember the board approved the process, and so now that we are going to be underway and the criteria are established, one of the things I'm going to be asking Ms. Altman to do is to initiate that process as you guys defined it. So once we move on, then we'll start the process.
I thought you were trying to get a year of planning in.
Well, it kind of got slowed down when the new process was developed. And so we thought now that the new process has been developed and now that the criteria can be approved, now we can start both things moving forward in terms of identification of the districts that would belong in ASD, as well as the process then for hiring a superintendent for that school district.
At what point does that year of planning start once the superintendent?
That was our hope. So right now, it's not going to be a year. I mean, I think if we hire, unless the planning committee, and we would have to probably go back to the legislature, because the good news is that the lieutenant governor, when he first met with us, said, "I'd rather you go slow than go fast, to get this right." And so if we needed to put that out a year, he was fine with that. But that out a year was 18-19. And so now if that we were going to out another year, then that would be 1920, which is a little bit further out than I think that the legislature had in mind. So what we would like to do then is fast track the hiring of the superintendent so that the superintendent could start immediately, and we have a pen and funds for that, start immediately to prepare for the opening for the 18-19 school year. Mm-hmm.
Group that was put together.
That's been finalized, but
Oh,
no
my.
committee's been put together. Because you remember the idea was there'd be a
Oh, no.
board representative and no
yeah.
committee's been put together.
To Dr. Elam's point, we've not even started with that yet.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's the reason I
Yeah.
said now that we've got the criteria, I'm going to ask Ms. Altman to initiate the process that you guys approved so that we can get that underway.
The procedure. This was the first step, was getting this criteria done, and then move into those others. Dr. Elam?
Well, I would just say that I think for, just to make it, I think it would go smoother that the superintendent of ASD is, excuse me, hired and in place, identified, if not physically here, before an announcement or an announcement, decisions are made on the districts. I just think pointing to you and saying you're going to be in the Achievement School District, we'll be getting you a leader in the near future, is not going to sit well.
Well, the thing that I think
Like
is
you need to have the organization
but bear in
in
mind,
place
this is
first.
mid-year, and my experience is such that you're going to have, it's going to be difficult to get someone to leave if they're currently sitting superintendent mid-year to come to this position. So I acknowledge that. And, but I think in fairness to them, I think they need to know what they're coming into. So if I've got a district that I'm coming into, and I'm going to make the numbers up, that is 3,000 students and 5 schools, versus if I'm coming into a district that's 10,000 students and 8 schools, whatever the case might be, I think that's going to probably inform a superintendent as to whether they really want to apply for this position or not. So I think that's the reason we'd like to get on out there. This is what you're going to actually be dealing with. I mean, an experienced superintendent, will know that, and a superintendent that is interested in reform work wants to know what is it that I'm dealing with. To leave my job when you're not telling me how much or the size of my job, I think that's going to be harder to get somebody to say, I'm good with that and just go on, take a leap of faith. Versus, no, we're hiring you for a 3,000 student district, a 5,000 student district, a 10,000, a 15,000, whatever it ends up being, that then informs the people that are getting ready to apply what they're actually dealing with. I don't know that I would apply for the unknown. I guess that's what I'm saying as an experienced person. I don't know that I would apply for what I didn't know I was applying for. Because then the last thing we want to do is hire the person, get these districts identified, and the superintendent go, whoa, this is not what I thought it was going to be, and I'm backing out. And then we're really in a tough spot. I'd rather them know what they're getting into before we actually.
I understand that, and I agree with that. But on the other hand, looking at it in the other way, you identify these districts and say, as soon as we get a superintendent in place, you're going to be moving into the achievement schools.
Well, that's not going to
Then through
occur
one
until
search.
the fall. Well, but that's not going to occur until the fall of the year at the earliest. So they're business as usual in terms of those districts. It's not like they're without a superintendent or without a board or without the work that they're going to be doing. So that would all stay in play until the fall of the year. But it also gives the superintendent an opportunity to start to get to know the districts, to get to know the communities, start working with the communities, and building that kind of culture that he or she wants to build with the communities that they're going to be working with.
I agree with that, but I am concerned that there are going to be school districts that are going to be, I mean, they'll still have their superintendent, but if I'm told everything's going to change next year, blow off this year. We've lost the battle of remaining independent.
Well, I guess I've got more faith in our sitting superintendents because I believe that our superintendents work very hard to stay focused on the children that's in their charge. And I would find it hard to believe that you would just have people just back away from the plate altogether and say, not my problem, because they're still responsible for those children, they're still responsible for their education, and they're the leaders of their districts. And I've got faith that they would keep that in mind.
Well, and we still have some steps to go and time to flesh this out. I mean, to Dr. Elam's point, before we actually get.
Yeah, well, we'll be bringing recommendations to you.
Point,
and then that conversation can take.
That committee that's put together will be able to address some of this too. All right, any other questions or comments on this? All right, item 4, this is the 2016-17 statewide accountability results. You have in your blue folder the slide presentation. Dr. Vanderford? Okay.
Copy of the districts.
Paula, can you pull the mic closer to you?
Up, yeah.
So that's my next statement, that behind tab 4, you have the 2016-2017 accountability results.
The standard question is, why did we not get this before today?
So the Commission on School Accreditation didn't see and approve the results until Tuesday, and the results are under embargo until today.
Some of the rest of them may not be able to, though.
I'm probably one of them.
Go ahead, Dr. Vanderford.
So behind tab 4,
worms.
you have 2 different documents. Both contain
The pink dye's got you sassy
the
today.
district results, the results of the 700-point scale, which is the elementary and middle schools, and the 1,000-point scale, which is the high schools. The first document is organized ranked based on performance classifications, A through F, in each of those 3 categories, and the second document is organized alphabetically. So if you have one particular district that you would like to. So with, as we analyze the accountability data, we continue to focus on the State Board of Education's goals. The accountability model specifically addresses 3 of the 6 goals that we have. Goal 1, all students proficient and showing growth in all assessed areas. Goal 2, every student graduates from high school and is ready for college and career. And Goal 6, every school and district is rated C or higher. The results that we'll discuss today reflect the progress and the achievements that students have made on state assessments. ACT, the advanced courses, and the state's rising graduation rate. The letter grades correspond with performance in each of the accountability components and reflect the proficiency levels in schools and districts, as well as preparing students for college and career. Of the 143 districts, the official results are, we have 15 districts that received an A, 43 districts received a B, 43 districts received a letter grade of a C, 36 districts a D, and 9 Fs. So just to briefly summarize the schools, we had 114 schools that received a letter grade of an A, 261 schools a B, 224 schools received a C, 185 schools received a D, and 93 schools were rated an F. So on the slide that's on the screen, this is the results for 147 districts, which includes our 144 public school districts and the 3 charter schools. And so as state statute requires, a charter school is reported as an LEA, and so that is in your data, and that's why you have the 147. So in summary, 15 districts, as I previously stated, received an A. When you look at the 700-point scale for the schools and break that down, we had 64 of the 700-point schools that received an A, and 50 of the schools within the 1,000-point scale, on the 1,000-point scale, received an A. Moving to the next slide summarizes the low achievers. So with the 147 districts, again, that includes the charters, 9 districts received an F. 89 of the elementary and middle schools, or the 700-point schools, received an F. And of the 241 schools that are on the 1,000-point scale, 4 of those are high schools are rated an F. So overall, we saw an increase in proficiency across all subject areas. In fact, there are some districts that made significant improvement when regards to proficiency when you look at the 2016 results as compared to the 2017 results. 80 of the districts, 83% of them improved in math proficiency, 85% in English language art, 76% in science, and 57% in U.S. history. As you can see on the screen, we saw a significant increase in the acceleration component of the model, which includes advanced coursework such as dual credit, dual enrollment, the International Baccalaureate, the advanced placement, certifications. We do know that some schools and districts need significant improvement if we want to make the college and career readiness goal a reality. Of the most at-risk students we see are growing at a slightly higher percentage than other students, and as you all know, the accountability system is high academic growth.
Back to that slide, Paul, I'm going to ask you. Looking at graduation rate and question about that, and this person said that, this author said that if you took into consideration there are 5,400 children who graduated through the alternate way around and did not take the, or did not pass the subject area test, you know, that wouldn't, which has been a big barrier for a lot of kids, you know, to get into the diploma, was the passing the subject area test. So if you looked at and took those 5,400 out, this may not be as. Anybody want to respond?
Yeah, but graduation is graduation, and that's, so whether you graduate with passing the test or you graduate with another option, it's still graduation. So it's not, you can't remove them because they actually graduated. They either had an ACT score that was such, they either had a composite score that met that. I mean, those are board approved graduation options, so they're all graduates. Now we are disaggregating the data internally. And so that's one of the things that we're looking at to see, but I can tell you that the vast majority of our children graduate passing the test, the vast majority. Then there are others then, if they can't pass the test, have other options that are board approved options. But the majority of these children are passing tests to graduate. Paula, pull the mic closer to you. Yeah. So we'll begin by talking about the overall results for districts. But before we get into that, I just want to remind you that for 2016-2017 accountability data, we had a new baseline to determine the thresholds for earning each letter grade. If you recall, in August, the board voted to set this new baseline to correct the artificially high growth rates that were included in the 15-16 accountability grades that were issued. For the 2016-17 accountability grades, both districts and schools have been awarded the highest grade that they achieved based on the current threshold or the one that was used for the 15-16 accountability, or the new baseline for 17-18. So the highest grade is what we'll discuss as the official grade, but again, for transparency, you'll see that the grades and the points are both provided for the sake of transparency for both of the scales.
Next slide is just a representation of the components, and we won't discuss these individually, but as you see that we have, as we mentioned earlier, 400 of the 1,000 points are focused on the growth of the students from one year to the next. And then just as a reminder, in yellow, this is the second year of the phase-in for the acceleration component, which counts 60% participation and 40% performance for this school year compared to the 70-30 last year. So the next slide represents the top 10 performing districts, Petal being the #1 performing district, followed by Oxford, Boonville, Enterprise, Ocean Springs, Clinton, Lamar, Poplarville, Biloxi, and Madison. The next slide represents the bottom 10 performing districts, and you'll see the footnote with the charter schools separated out at the bottom. That's Hazelhurst, Montgomery County, Sunflower County, Greenville, Holmes, Wilkerson, Noxubee, Jackson Public School District, Humphreys County, and LaFleur County. This slide is just a representation of the grades or performance classifications that have been produced for the current system, beginning with the 13-14 school year, and then in yellow on the end, this is the breakdown of the summary that I gave you initially with the number of A's through F's that were assigned grades. Look at the school grade.
In looking at 16 and 17, 17 is using the 17 baseline?
Grade with the higher of the two. Yes, sir. The higher of the two.
Question before, and you said you didn't know. So how many districts benefited by using the higher?
5 districts benefited by the, there was a
B to an A?
There were 3 districts that went from a B to an A, and I think it was, and 2 that went from an F to a D. So a total of 5 districts benefited from the cut, 3 at the high end and 2 at the lower end.
Tell us who they are now.
I can, if you'd like me to. So the Union County School District, Long Beach School District, and Newton County were the 3 that received the benefit. And then we had
top end.
On the top end, and on the bottom end, it was 2 charter schools, Reimagine Prep and Smilo Prep, under the Republic Charter.
But what we did, none of it didn't move any of these up into the top 10.
That's correct. And
So that's good.
and so this might be a good point. A question was raised in the accountability subcommittee, or a conversation this morning. So if you recall, when we presented the impact data to you in August to ask you to make the decision regarding the cut point, we said that on the current baseline there were 7 A's. And it appeared that the cut was going to allow 7 additional.
7 or 9.
That there were 7, or I think it was 7 at the time that we brought the impact data to you. But we emphasized that that impact data was preliminary to the preliminary results that were going to be released to the district. When we calculated that impact data and the number was 7, it did not include the acceleration component, and it did not include the college and career readiness component, and it did not take into account any of the appeals that were filed during the 30-day preliminary result window. So we had 32 districts that filed appeals. The total ended up being, I think, about 799 individual student level appeals, and out of that 799, I think around 250 were approved and the remainder denied. So there was a lot of data that was not included in that 7. So had we not reset the baseline, there would have been 12 A's rather than the 15 that are we're asking you to approve today.
Ellen, you have a question?
Yeah, this may not be the right time. If not, Dr. Bump, you tell me, and I'll gladly close my mouth until time I can ask the question. Since we're talking about the baseline cut, wasn't there, let me rephrase that. In subgroups in special need kids, in some of those subgroups, they was able to take a test that was different from the test that was given to the regular students, right?
Alternative. Yes, sir. There's an alternate assessment.
Did those tests that was given to the subgroup, in counting that, did it help hinder anyone from moving up a grade level?
No, sir, it did not. The alternate assessment is included in the accountability data for this year as participation only.
I thought the Fed, am I wrong in thinking that the Feds had?
It's
always been that way, has it?
Sir?
And always been that way, has it? Because my wife takes full credit for Clinton being A school because her kids did well.
Maybe.
No, the federal
I'm
government.
kind of confused.
Yeah, no, to Mr. McClellan's point, the federal government requires you to test all special ed children.
Right. Okay.
And they demand a participation rate, just as we do of general ed, of 95% or higher. What they have allowed states to do is to give an alternate assessment for those children that are significantly cognitively disabled. But those scores count in the overall assessment.
So we did include.
Yes, sir. Oh, yes, sir.
Okay, so
we're required by law.
That changed, Dr. Wright.
Oh my gosh!
Do you remember?
No, I mean, it goes back to when I was in charge of special ed, which was a few years ago. That requirement has been in place for a number of years about testing and reporting on special ed. Because the federal law, well, the reason that they did it was because before, actually it occurred under No Child Left Behind, and what was happening is that schools would just say, we'll test all of our kids except those kids, in order to make their scores look better. And then the federal government came in behind and said, no, you're responsible for educating and performing or reporting out on the performance of all children. So then the Fed said, no, you got to test all kids. And then that made a whole swing in terms of instructional approach, because now you did have to test and instruct these children. So
But with the alternate test.
Only those that would qualify for the alternate test.
Right,
yes, sir.
Right.
Yes, sir. And then all others.
Back to my next question. Did we count those?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Because anybody that doesn't take the alternate, any special ed student that has to take the regular MAP test. There's no choice.
Following on that one.
Yep. Good question. Good question.
This year, we didn't count them, that we just used a participation grade or something.
Counted them as participation. We had a new alternate assessment, and so we have not set standards on that new alternate assessment, so therefore we counted it for participation only as a new assessment rather than participation and performance. But they still counted this year, but just for participation only.
Okay, moving along.
So the next, as we move into the schools, the next couple of slides just gives you the visual of the components that are included in the model. When we look at the 700-point schools, just as a reminder, if we have a school configuration that does not test science in the 5th grade, then they are what we refer to as a 600-point school that is equated to the 700-point scale. And then the following slide is the slide very similar to the slide that we discussed with the districts. So this is the 1,000-point scale for any school that includes a grade 12. Got ahead of myself in explaining the 600 point scale. All right, so the next slide we'll move into is the top 10 700-point schools. So this is elementary and middle schools. You'll see that at the top we have Jackson Public School District with Davis Magnet. You'll notice that Gulfport School District appears on the list twice with 2 of their elementary schools. DeSoto County School District appears 3 times with 3 of their schools. And we have Enterprise, Harrison County, Choctaw County, Petal, was about to say Gulfport again, but I've already mentioned Gulfport. Right, and then the bottom 10 700-point schools, we have Noxubee County, and you'll notice that Jackson Public School District appears on the list for 4 of their schools: Humphreys County, Sunflower County, Columbus, and Natchez Adams. The next slide represents the top 10 performers on the 1,000-point scale, or the high schools. We have DeSoto County listed 3 times in the top 10. Poplarville, Alcorn, Enterprise, Ocean Springs, Pass Christian, and Petal. The next slide is the bottom 10 performing high schools. Okolona, JPS is listed with 3 of their schools: Chickasaw County, Jefferson Davis, LaFleur, Vicksburg, Cahoma County, and Tate County. And the next slide is the same comparison slide that we had for the district that represent data for over the past 4 years, and the last column summarizing what I provided earlier. So I briefly talked about the performance cuts at the beginning of the presentation. So the next slide is the actual cuts that were reestablished and are approved in policy for the current school year and thereafter until there's a policy decision for those to remain changed. Now the next,
You say until a policy thing, this is not for hereafter, you know?
it is, I mean, for 2016 thereafter, with the exception of an approved policy by the board that changes the cuts.
Remember, we've got the EL component that's coming that is going to require change in the accountability model, which very well may require change in the cut scores. You've also got an accountability task force that has been in play. If you remember, 3 years ago, I told the superintendents that at their request, let's keep everything solid, the same for 3 years, but then can we look at any of the other unintended consequences of the accountability model in year 3? So the accountability task force is now looking at all the business rules, and there's a lot of input that's coming from superintendents around changes that they would like to see or things that they want considered. And that whole report would then come to you for your consideration. We hear you, but we hear you, but you've also got superintendents out there rightfully sowing, well, hang on, they're rightfully so saying, I've got children that are graduating in December, full-time graduates. And yet, since they're not here in June, they don't count in my full academic year, and I don't get any credit for those kids. So when you've got some of your top performers, as you saw here, having a whole lot of kids being able to graduate in December, they're saying, that's not fair to me, that you're not counting them in my full academic year, but we don't count them because that's the business rule around full academic year. It might require that. That's why, and the superintendents know that. We discussed that this morning at the accountability subcommittee. Mr. Bailey and I had the whole conversation because it's around the same thing. You've got these top performers that have got a lot of students at performance level 5. Well, that is the highest, most rigorous performance level. And what they're saying is, I have a student at a 5 and I keep him at a 5 and I don't get extra points for that. Like I get the same amount of points as bringing up somebody from a 3 to a 4 or 4 to whatever. And so they're saying, I want that considered. So we're trying to listen to all the superintendents saying, we've got the superintendents that are lower performing right now saying, don't touch the growth model. The growth model is something that benefits us because we're bringing up the bottom end. So you've got all these voices that you're trying to hear and consider, and then that's really the responsibility of the task force, and then they would be bringing recommendations to the board to see whatever changes they're recommending be changed. So we're trying to listen to the people in the field whose lives are really impacted by this on a daily basis.
got a little bit ahead of the remainder of my presentation. Paula,
Go
Ms.
right
Franklin,
ahead.
I was getting to your point. So the next 3 slides represent the cuts. You'll see the blue line here, and the gold is the 17 cuts versus the 16 cuts for the district scale. And so with the district as well as the 700 point school scale, which is on the next slide, with the differences there, this is what we expected. This is the outcome that we had predicted based on the impact data when the decision was made to reset the cuts. However, when you look at the last slide, which is the difference in the cuts for the 1,000-point schools, this is actually an outcome that was not expected. But this illustration shows the difference in the cuts for A through F for the 2016 baseline and the 2017 baseline. So during that 30-day window, the internal appeals process, we had a number of districts that filed appeals regarding the use of the bridge scale that we've had numerous conversations about. And the appeal was specifically based on the fact that we were still utilizing the bridge scale for the 1,000-point schools at the high school level. So we looked at the impact data, we calculated the impact data both on the bridge and off the bridge, and looked at the data in lieu of what the districts were actually telling us to first determine if the districts had a valid concern. So after producing the impact data, reviewing the data, we consulted with the Technical Advisory Committee, as you know, that is chaired by Dr. Chris Domaleski. You've heard from him many times, and was back and forth about the use, the benefits, the consequences of using the bridge. And at that time, during the internal review process, the decision was made to remove the 8th grade park scores, which the ELA and math, off the bridge, and only leaving the 7th grade bank scores that were the MCT2 assessments on the bridge. And so we had lengthy conversations about this with members of the Accountability Task Force. Again, and the TAC was in town for 2 days last week, and accountability was a topic of discussion there as well. And all the members of the Technical Advisory Committee continued to remind us, the agency staff, and we've reminded the commission as well, and we'll have more detailed conversations at the next Accountability Task Force meeting, that we are still working through a very difficult process of comparing results over 3 years using 3 different assessments. And so what we're left with right now are the remnants of the bridge and the impact that it has on the 1,000-point system. And so,
how did the bridge scores play in us having to reset standards?
From the previous year was the inflated growth. And so we had already removed the K-8 schools off the bridge, but the initial intent was that we thought that the high schools should remain on the bridge. But once we had all of the data and ran the impact data, that didn't prove to be what was in the best interest of the children. So it was removed from the bridge, and when it was removed from the bridge, these are the cuts that you see. So the Technical Advisory Committee continued to remind staff that we have to use the best methods, and there's numerous methods, and they continue to emphasize that all methods have limitations, and that they support the decision that the agency has made over the last 3 years to produce accountability results using the 3 assessments, and that anytime we have a situation like this, it takes time for this to, and Dr. Domaleski's term was to flush this out of our system, and we are still with the 1,000-point schools, with the high schools, this is where we have a concern, and that the
where you've got, like on the district cut scores, you've got between 16 and 17 cut scores, you have almost a merger, whereas they're getting wider on the 700 schools and the 1,000 schools. And that's
well, the difference on the high schools here is the use of the bridge. I mean, that's what had the greatest impact on the difference that we see in the cuts. And so the technical advisory committee to us said, we're sending you, the TAC was sending the agency staff a red flare that says you still have to pay close attention to these 1,000-point schools. And so our accountability task force was charged with a separate, and I'll talk about that charge in a moment, but through that work, Dr. Domaleski emphasized that we need to continue to pay special attention to what we're seeing as we are moving toward having 3 years of map data in the high school in our 1,000-point system.
other influences in addition to using the bridge and the 3 different assessments. Because before we voted and all that went back and forth, we said that the reason we were having to change it was because we had 3 different assessments in 3 years.
And the use of the bridge to measure
Artificial growth. Artificial growth. Growth.
Talk about the bridge. The bridge was the primary topic of our conversation around that. Calculate growth.
And I think that the fear of superintendents that are talking about the 9-12 schools are the fear that this echoes into the 3rd year. And with the bridge scale, bridge or not bridge, and so we're measured so much on growth and how that affects the 3rd year. So run it as the technical advisory committee looks at that. I think we stay open to the possibilities that there may be a 3rd year echo related to this, and that certainly is concerning the superintendents of 9-12 schools.
TAC reminded us, our goal is for our entire system to be stabilized.
Absolutely.
And so as we look at our 700-point schools, as we look at all the components of our system, we feel that the system is stabilizing, and the 1,000-point schools is the area that we need to pay close attention to over the coming year to ensure that the entire system is stabilized. And so in addition, and Dr. Wright alluded to this earlier, for those of you that have been on the board and any commission members, when we moved to the current model that we have as a new model, we were charged with every 3 years to review the business rules of the accountability system to ensure that, Mr. McClellan's not said it, but to ensure that the business rules remained appropriate and that we were getting the results that we knew that most represented the performance of students across the state in all schools, not just lower performing schools versus higher performing schools, but in all schools. And so we have begun that work with the accountability task force that we have now. We've had numerous meetings with superintendents, and we still will continue to have them. We started, as I emphasized back in August, we started at Mass, and Mr. Franklin was in one of our sessions, and Dr. Elam as well, saying that we would be listening to all of the district's concerns that they had regarding any of the business rules associated with the system. We have not committed to changing any business rules through that process, but we've committed to the review of the process. And so we've had a number of agenda items that I feel will have some business rules that we will in the future want to tweak in addition to what is required that we change to comply with ESSA. But I just wanted to emphasize to the board that we're working through that process, and in any policy decision that is recommended by the task force will be vetted with our technical advisory committee and also presented to the Commission on School Accreditation before it comes to the board, and then we'll have the APA process following any decisions that might be made by the board.
Franklin, you got
what you just said, and we could expectation.
No.
No, that's not what you said.
And Dr. Domaleski emphasized it's too early for us to make that decision that we would even need to make a change for the upcoming school year. I mean, it was just a warning signal that when you get results that look like this, and we know what's transpired over the course of the last 3 years, his advice to the accountability staff was we shall advise the accountability task force at their next meeting on December the 5th of some of the concerns that we see as we see now the official results. And then you should have these conversations with the commission as well as the state board. And so we talked through just what we're talking through today with the commission on Tuesday.
Dr. Kelly? Yeah.
Conversation we had in accountability committee meeting this morning is that while it is too early to say that any changes will be forthcoming, I think we have to telegraph to superintendents, to the leadership of the state, the legislators, that we are continually looking at the business rules. What I would not like to see happen is that we just march on towards the next year, not being transparent about us what we're looking at, and then announce that we are about to make a change. I think superintendents have a duty and an obligation to know that we're reviewing the business rule, and I think all stakeholders have that responsibility to know. So I'm glad we're having this conversation here.
Dr. Kelly, one thing that Dr. Vanderford didn't mention is that her team is planning a series of regional superintendents meetings so that she can go out and meet all across the state, not just with the people that are the superintendents that are serving on the accountability task force, and be able to meet with them face to face to let them know what we're looking at, and to also hear from them about what any of their concerns might be. So to your point about involving stakeholders, it's going to be critical that we do that.
Well,
I think all of us want it to settle down. I know I do. I know all of you do as well. You want to see the stability and the predictability. All of us want to see that. But we can't be naive about what is actually happening. So we have to be transparent about it.
Well, and it's important that superintendents and local people who are dealing with it know the nuances that may be unintended, but they know it. So it's important that we hear from them, and take into consideration their comments and their requests. So anyway.
And I think the regional meetings that Dr. Wright alluded to with the superintendents around the state, and they will transmit that information to their school administrators. That's where that's going to come in.
Well, and having the same or knowing what assessment they're going to be using, that's a real stabilizing factor too. So, yeah. Dr. Vanderford, does that complete you? Any questions or any other comments for Dr. Vanderford or her team? Well, thank you. I think one thing that we sometimes lose in this, I added up from the slide of official school grades. We have about 70% of our schools that are C, of our districts, I guess. And we forget that sometimes, that we have that many school districts that are doing well, that are doing above average. And obviously we have to focus on those bottom schools, but those that are struggling. But at the same time, we can't lose focus over the fact that by and large, our schools are doing well, and people are out there working every day to make sure that they're doing well.
Altman, in hindsight, we should have reported that number when we referenced goal 6.
Yeah, I was adding it up.
There you go.
Okay, it is.
I think Dr. Benton pretty well proved today in her report that the bottom is beginning to
shift.
Come up.
Yeah, now that's exciting news. Thank you all. We appreciate your work. It is almost 12 o'clock. We're going to stop for lunch now, and then we can complete the rest of our agenda after lunch. You all tell me. You want 45 minutes or you want an hour? What do you want?
Half hour.
45 should be good.
All right. Okay. So we'll be back here at 1:45.
Yep.
Meeting back to order, please. Get our seats. I was reminded earlier that I failed to ask when we were approving the agenda about consent agenda items, so let me ask that now in case there's staff people who need to be in the room that may not be here. Do you have consent agendas, item 7? Do you have items about related to the consent agenda, Mr. Franklin?
Passed. A and F only.
We're doing better. A and F. Okay. Anybody else have one? All right. A and F. All right. Okay. Do we have a motion to pull out and discuss separately item A and F on the consent agenda? Okay. A second. Well, Mr. Franklin made the motion. He'll give you the second. Okay. All in favor? Okay. Motion carries. All right, now let's go back. We are to item 5. Mr. Franklin, the first one being teacher supply list.
Page here.
Just while Mr. Franklin's looking, we've had a request from people that are listening to this live stream that if you are speaking, please make sure your mic is pulled to you because some people are having difficulty hearing some of the conversation.
All right, thank you, Madam Chairman. Item A under my list is the teacher supply list. And what I'd like to ask us to consider is that we make a request of our local boards and superintendents to stop the practice of providing supply lists to parents for the basic supplies that their children need when they start school in August. And I'll give you the background information now. One is we have the poorest taxpayers in the country that already spend about $5 billion on K-12 education. And then when they get these supply lists, and this is a personal experience, our little church, we live in a small community and it's a small church, but we were trying, the ladies in the church wanted to help the little elementary school in there in our community. So we agreed that we would, get one supply list and make a backpack and do a supply list. And when we got involved, we did that. And Carolyn went, and, of course, and did the purchasing and all. And when we got ready to deliver, I said, well, I can't do much on purchasing, but I can help deliver. So me and a couple of ladies from the church went out to the little school to take it. And here was a story that was shared with me. This lady had been to Walmart to get her supply list. And the supply list for us was about $75 a child. And while there was a lady, an elderly lady that was shopping with a young girl. And the lady said, oh, you're shopping for your daughter. She said, no, that's my grandchild. And I am shopping for her. But she and I are also shopping for a lady in our church. There's a lady in our church who has 9 children, and there's no way she can afford the supplies for all her 9 children, and our church wants to make sure that she has it. So if you stop and think 9 times 75, that's a pretty good burden to put on some of the poorest taxpayers in the state, And here's some information that I want to give you. When I say poorest taxpayers, and y'all have heard me say this before, In Mississippi, the median household income in Mississippi is $40,593. In Maryland, $75,847. The average in the country is $55,000. In addition to that, the unemployment rate in our state is 6.5%. That's the 4th highest in the country. The poverty rate is 22%. That's the highest in the country. And one thing, and this really shocked, it was really kind of tough when I stopped to think about it, and we have in our state approximately 11.5% of the households in this country that earn $10,000 or less annually. How many of you in here could live on $10,000 or less annually? And yet we're taking people like that, and then we're giving them a supply list and say, do this for your children. And if you look at the state constitution, it says that we'll provide a free public education. Well, that's not free. And also, if you look, at what we spend money on, and we spend, at one time, it was a little over $5 billion. From this 2015-16 superintendent's report, it's a little under that. It's $4,853,000. And this has a wealth of information. I've used this for years, you know, but if you look at the receipts for public schools, this is a little over $5 billion. So we got districts that have a budget already of over $5 billion, and they're passing on $75 or give or take. And I'm not sure every district even does it, you know. But let's have some respect, or ask them to have some respect for those people in their communities that may have a difficult time and don't make as much, you know. And here's something, you may already be aware of this, but I looked at statewide expenditures for public schools. Those districts spend $75,119,070.91 on athletics. They spend another $34,655,656.58 on activities. Now, we'll say that some of the receipts, they don't list athletic receipts, they only list activity receipts. So they do get some receipts, and you know in athletics they get some receipts, so it's not all coming out of their instructional budget, you know. But I just think let's ask them to consider the taxpayers that are already footing the bills for those folks, to give some consideration to that and stop or desist in doing that practice of passing along costs to those parents who are supposed to be entitled to a free public education by the state constitution. And last thing I want to share with you, you know, these decisions are being made by local superintendents and boards. And I looked up what the average superintendent salary is. And if you look in Mississippi, the average state superintendent salary now is $115,000. And that's up $10,000 since 2012. So our superintendents have gotten a $10,000 raise since 2012, and we got 11.5% of our households that don't make that much, have that much as far as income in a whole year. So I just think it's something, if we really want to look at who's paying the bills and who does this and the other, that maybe we could consider asking those folks to not do that.
Oh, the next one? What do you?
Let's vote on that. I make a motion that we ask those folks. And I changed when I first started thinking about it, I wanted us to say that they can't. But I'm not really sure we can say that to the local board. And I'd rather do it in a positive way. Let's just ask them to think about the people who are already spending $5 billion on state, local, and federal taxes, you know, to support them. Let's just look at that one issue, you know. Could I frame it that way of a motion, Ms. Terry?
No, I'm just not sure that's our role.
Franklin, I certainly understand the basis for what you're saying and why you're saying it, but I would be concerned that local school boards and local school administrators would see that as something that's clearly outside of the State Board of Education's purview, to be dictating to them what they tell parents to buy or not to buy. I would see it as overdue influence. I would perceive it, I think, if I were at that level.
We don't do that all day, every day, you know. We are an agency that's part of our responsibility, you know. So that's my take on it.
Well, it wouldn't be nothing wrong with a suggestion, though, would it?
I can just say that's always a consideration. Well, in the school districts I've been involved with, and you always will keep your finger on the pulse of that. If there are families that couldn't afford that in certain ways, there were certain ways to scholarship that through PTOs and things of that nature. I think, I won't say all superintendents, most superintendents keep a tab, and most principals keep a tab on the fees that are being assessed. You certainly don't want, and particularly as you get into the high school realm, you don't want 4 subject areas assessing $75 a piece for each subject area, and so you certainly have to keep your tab. So I think there's some processes in place at the local level that help that situation. I think a measure that you also stand by is that does this sanction that we would impose impede instructional process at some point in time? So you have so many opportunities through the processes, and some of it are activity fees, but it also enhances an educational process that you may or may not have without that. So I think it's a kind of a umbrella shot there in terms that it may affect some very positively, but it may affect some negatively too.
One thing I was counting on Dr. Dean being here, y'all remember a couple of months back, he had looked at how much money districts have in their fund balances, you know? And I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was multiple hundreds of millions of dollars.
A good bit of money in their balance, but if you, go ahead, Mr. McClellan.
Kind of piggyback on what Mr. Franklin is saying, and if I'm following what you're saying, I don't think there's anything wrong with making that suggestion. Would it be? It at least let them know that we are conscious of what the amount of money that's being spent. If I hear you correctly, you're saying a suggestion, not a mandate.
Yes, sir. I had started out thinking mandate, but I just think that's a little too strong or too harsh.
Have the authority to mandate that, so it would have to be a suggestion.
Violate any, I mean, attorneys, does this violate even us doing this, anything around district home?
I mean, you have home rule issues, and what the board could do is maybe cite your considerations and your concerns, but you can't mandate. They have the authority, of course, to regulate their districts. And you can make a recommendation, just know that, or a suggestion rather, just know that it would be an official board suggestion.
Well, that would be my concern, is once the board votes on it, it becomes interpreted as a mandate, or this is what the board said. I think, let me ask this, in your superintendent regional meetings, could you just say to them or tell them that that's been brought up and there's been a concern about the amount of money that's being spent or being requested from parents?
I'd be happy to do that.
And that wouldn't be, I mean, that's more like a suggestion than it is to be something that's an official correspondence, yeah. Would that satisfy you to some degree? Yeah.
I'll be happy to add that to my
question. Yes, ma'am. I question, when we sit here and we talk about accountability scores, accountability model, and we got process standards running out the ears that they have to live up to and comply with, and then we say we can't do this.
Well, that's federal regulations and state regulations. A lot of it is, and so I don't, setting policy.
I had my say. Yes.
Okay, we know how you. We'll just see if.
Whatever the will of the group is.
All right. Item B, Title 37.
Title 37. A couple of months ago, Ms. Altman and I and Dr. Dean were in a meeting with Pete at on the legislative subcommittee, and we talked then. And this is something that's I've thought about for a long time and been involved with for a long time, on looking at Chapter 37 in the Education Code. And I'll tell you where I started, or I got pricked by it and started thinking about it. The former liaison from here, Steve Williams, who I think he's told me he had gone over there for the department like 14 years, And he said, when you start trying to look at legislation and pass something, he said, Chapter 37 is like an archaeological dig. You've got things that have been passed and are buried out there, and you start thinking about what do we really need to do for children. And he said, at some point in time, we need to clean that thing up, So I just mentioned that day that maybe we could get Pete to pull together an external group of folks, and Pete had a name, one of the legislative people over there, but local school board attorneys or people that are familiar with that, or some legislators, and all, get an external group and let Pete just supervise it. And he said it would take a long time that day. But look at cleaning up Chapter 37.
All right. Any comments on this or any questions on this? I guess my question would, to me, this is a legislative issue. So, are you saying that Pete would make the contact to the legislative whomever and get the process going. Is that
Well, always indeed. We make the suggestions to the legislators. And I'll give you an example. Anybody know Toby Barker, who's now the mayor in Hattiesburg?
Right.
When he was in the legislature, every year he went and pulled out but he was looking at real ridiculous things that had been passed way back, and he would bring every year a piece of legislation forward to delete from the code. And this would just simply be more of a concentrated thing on just education issues that are out there that are redundant and are way past their usefulness and that type thing. And then, of course, I think it would have to go as far as a part of the legislation, a piece of legislation to get them to delete those from the code, you know.
Yeah, I just was going to say, I don't know that this is an MDE function. I think that as much as I've been involved with the legislature, which certainly isn't the length of time you have, I would see this more as their function to go through their own code. I mean, we take forward technical amendments each year that are pertinent to our work, no doubt, but to totally go through the entire Chapter 37, I just don't see as MDE's core function.
Anybody else got a comment on this? So what, no, are you putting this in the form of a motion? Okay, it's in the form of a motion. I guess my question would be, my comment is, if, is your intention, I guess, is more like it, for Pete to initiate the action.
Being a group of external folks.
Oh, and oversee it too.
Yes, ma'am, and then look at cleaning up Chapter 37.
Help me here, then. Excuse me. Help me here. Then what is the? Assuming that all happened and it went well, what is the outcome you're wanting to have? You just want clean legislation?
I want us to clean up what's in there so that when we look at what needs to be done, that we're not voting over something that's been out there for 10 years.
And that will gain us what?
That will gain us a cleaner code. So
Explain the process.
Go to the code. Have you ever tried to look through Code 37? Looking up an issue. It's just page after page on through on a huge booklet, you know, that's stuff, some of it that was been passed 20 years ago. You know.
That is legislative action, though, right? That has to do that?
Legislative action.
Something that we could talk to the Senate Chair of Education and the House Chair and just suggest to them that.
Well, their aides they have people over there to do that kind of thing. Yeah.
We could talk to them.
Okay, you have a motion. Okay, do we have a second to his motion? Okay, we have a motion and a second that we charge Pete putting together a group to clean up Chapter 37, that he would initiate and oversee the cleanup. That sounds like something you'd do after a storm. But anyway, that is the motion. Yeah, that is the motion. Those in favor? Wait. Oh, I thought we discussed it. I'm sorry.
So what I hear you say is that Pete would know basically those are codes that best fit this department at the present time.
Not
those that's
necessarily.
outdated. Excuse me?
I wouldn't necessarily think he'd know every one of them. Although
I'm
Pete's a smart guy. I don't want to, but anyway, go ahead.
He's a smart guy, but we've had a number of groups that have discussed a lot of things that a lot of smart people could have probably handled. But I'm assuming that what you were saying is that the old codes that's no longer in use, that this task force would go and research those codes and ask the legislature for removal. Is that okay?
Say other people, like the name that Pete used is the young man that writes the education bills in the House. Pete, what's Dwan Johnson? But people like Dwan and then Bob in the Senate, you know, that deal with that all day, every day and all, and then local school boards that have to, school board attorneys.
But to be clear to your question, Mr. McClellan, it's not just some, I mean, it's my understanding that he wants this done from the very beginning to the very end of Chapter 37, not just some pieces of 37. So that's my concern, because Mr. Franklin's right. It's like that thick, and it is law after law after law after law, and is
time going to be time consuming is what real time?
Enormously time consuming, number one, and number two, I think we're out of our lane. I don't think that's our lane. I think that's the legislator's lane, and I'm concerned that this could end up causing a lot of hard feelings, quite frankly, that we have stepped into their lane when it is their lane.
Okay. Who? Go.
Mentioned Mr. Smith's name several times. Obviously, they've had some discussion about that.
We discussed it that morning, and what happened was when we came in, the chair wasn't there. So when we had to do the subcommittee report, I failed to bring it up. And that's why I just thought I'd bring it up now.
Question is, as you've known, that we request Pete to look at the Chapter 37, put together a group to clean up Chapter 37 beginning to end, and he would initiate and oversee this cleanup. Okay. Those in favor, say, okay. Okay. Those opposed?
Aye.
Motion fails.
Next, item C is the 3-year alternate route teacher certification. Back in June, we dealt with an issue that impacted the alternate route certification that we had passed. A couple of years ago, JP, when we were out in Clinton, JP brought forward a 3-year licensure certificate there where it was renewable each year, but it gave people who couldn't meet all the licensure requirements immediately after graduation, like with their praxis test and that type of thing. It gave them time to do that and districts to work with them. And so we passed to change that. And when we got into the discussion, we passed it, and then the next month in July, in looking at the conservative reports, Dr. Eileen Richards in LaFleur County had on there that changing that made it hard on recruiting. And so in talking to Dr. Richards, I want to share with you her story. You know, she became a conservator in December of 2015. In the spring of 2016, she had 65 openings in LaFleur County as a conservator. So what she found was it was a lot easier for her. She couldn't find licensed people. So she was getting graduates, you know, who had a degree, and that's what this and going and helping them using federal dollars, et cetera, and working through Mississippi Valley to get these people certified. So spring forward to the spring of 2017, when we just passed, those people that she had brought in under that, and she worked with everybody to get them certified or get them along the pathway, she kept 90% of those folks. They were producing for her. And all she needed in the spring of 17 was 12 more. So she went like she did the year before and got her those 12 to bring in and to use that same process to help them get a certification and also have certified folks in her classrooms. Then in July, we passed this in June, and in July, she gets a notice that she can't do what she had done the year before. Well, Paula says that wasn't a change. It was simply doing what maybe should have been done all along, you know. But I know, to me, when we passed the law, we passed the policy here to where we could take 3 years to do that. But anyway, it threw a wrench in what she was trying to do up there to get certified folks in the classroom and address the needs in that district. And what my motion is that we go back and rescind that action in June and reinstate the rule as it was, the 3-year thing. Now, I called a state dean, and if you look in the background information here, through the APA process, we got 9 letters, and 8 of those said don't change it. But we ignored that. And we did change it. And that's us. I'm not saying Paula, that's us. We did as a board. But when I asked this person, I said, what do you think about that change? And their thing was, just throw out the whole thing. Because if you enact this, then that 3-year thing that you had done to help folks is you're just gutting that, and it's no longer useful. Just do away with it. You're not helping anybody. And I know that when we first, JP had met with deans and superintendents and all, and it was some effort to try to help folks, those who were struggling with trying to get certified folks in their classrooms. And if you look at the letters that were attached to this, folks in Greenwood, Greenville, those type districts, Archdale, folks who have a struggle trying to get certified personnel, And so I'd like to see us go back and rescind this action and just go back to the original.
Back to the original plan.
Yes, ma'am, please.
All right. Dr. Vanderford, would you remind us of what the action was? And
so going back to the conversation that we had back in June and July, and then Mr. Franklin's took a couple hours out of his time last week to come and sit down with the Office of Teaching and Leading for us to have this conversation. But I won't spend 2 hours recapping that conversation. But to clarify, in the past, under a former leadership and administration, we had an emergency license or an interim license that allowed individuals to go into the classroom without the license while they worked to get their license. And a former state superintendent suspended that on or around like 2010, something like that. So with the increase in the shortage of teachers that we've had across the state, we were asked to revisit what we could do that the statute allowed us to do with issuing an emergency license. So we went back to the licensure commission. I was working for Dr. Bodwin at the time under him. We went back to the licensure commission and asked them, would they approve this special 3-year non-renewable license a year at a time in order to get some individuals in the classroom. They approved it. But what the non-public comments that Mr. Franklin is referring to is asking us to do something that violates state law as well as state board policy. So previous MDE staff that are no longer here did grant an institution permission to enroll candidates into an alternate route program without meeting the entrance requirements. So when we passed the policy initially for year 1, mistakenly assumed that when the institutions enrolled individuals into those programs that they would meet the admission requirements. So midway through year 1, we recognized and realized that institutions and more than one, there was only one granted written permission, but more than one began to admit candidates that had not met the requirements of law and policy. So we asked the institutions, we cease and desist, and when we move forward with year 2 of the policy, which Mr. Franklin is referring to, with the approval process, we included language in the policy to state that they could not enroll without meeting the admission requirements. So we were enforcing what was already in policy and statute in year 2. We had to come back and revise the policy for year 2. We knew we were bringing it back to the commission and the board all along, because when the licensure commission approved it for year 1, we had to establish the criteria for receiving the license for year 2 and year 3. And to meet progress. So the policy that came back to the board recently outlined what means meeting progress. And so in all of the revisions, we just included the statement that you must meet entrance requirements. Now, when the team met, it was Dr. Burson, Dr. Hart, and Dr. Murphy and myself with Mr. Franklin. We made a commitment to look at the statute and to exercise our authority under the statute in helping these districts. Now, Dr. Murphy and his team, the Licensure Commission meets on November the 3rd, which is 1 week before the board meets in November, and his team has a couple of additional proposals to go back to the Licensure Commission, but one of these is to revise this policy where we can operate within the confines and be compliant with the law as well as the current state board policy that we have. And so we've committed to doing that and are doing that now, but the problem that we're running into with the board, and I told Mr. Franklin, I don't want to be publicly shamed for not having the backup material to the board a week before the November meeting, because our deadline to provide backup material would be November the 1st. But the Licensure Commission doesn't meet until the November the 3rd, and then the state board. So we'd be happy to get those revisions to the board in November, but it would have to be understood that we wouldn't have the backup material by November the 1st. Just to call you and provide it to you, and you'd come pick it up. So, so
the point is that we were operating previously in conflict with the state statute that
and state board
indicates that.
policy.
Okay.
And we worked with our AGs to determine that that were the case and that we did not have the authority to do what we were doing. And with our AG's advice, we worked with the institutions to say that we had to cease and desist. And it was already in the licensure guidelines and policy, but this was just the next opportunity we had to revise a policy to go ahead and clearly state the language. So it wasn't that we ignored the comments that came in from the districts to ask us to do that. It's just the fact that we had to follow law and policy. And so with one thing that we did do is those individuals that had been granted a license for year one without meeting the requirements, we did grandfather those individuals in so that we did not impact them moving forward for years 2 and 3. But all of those that in the second year of the policy that were the first year license holders, we held fast to the rule that they could not be granted unless they met the entrance requirements.
Mr. Beck, oh, excuse me, go ahead.
No, sir, it wasn't against the law. There was not a statement in that policy that was clear that the institutions had to meet the entrance requirements. We made an assumption that they would all do that, and they didn't. They continued to enroll candidates on a provisional status. Well,
board voted on and
that's right, in 2004. The policy that meets the entrance requirements for the institutions was passed in 2004, as well as it was put in the statute in 2004. I understand, but there was not clear language in that policy that referenced back to the 2004 law and state board policy for admissions requirements. At that time, call it my ignorance or whatever, didn't realize that I had to put a statement in a policy for institutions to know that they had to continue to meet the letter of the law from 2004 and state board policy from 2004. So, because I had had personal conversations with these institutions to say, you have to cease and desist because you're violating law and policy. So when they didn't, when I went back to the Licensure Commission for year 2, the Licensure Commission asked me, how are we going to address this? And those institutions appeared before the Licensure Commission and requested that it be changed, and the Licensure Commission said, no, we have to follow law and policy. So we included a statement to be very clear that if you admitted a candidate that didn't meet the admission requirements, you were violating law and policy, and you would be cited through your program, through the institution.
Bailey, you got a comment?
So, Dr. Manford, if we were to rescind this policy, would it put us back into conflict with state statutes?
It wouldn't put us back into conflict, but we could no longer issue the number of 3-year special non-renewable license for year 1 or for year 2 now. So it's going to adversely impact the districts if we can't issue this until we make some modifications. So in my professional opinion, if the board would allow us to meet with the Licensure Commission on November the 3rd and present our proposals, it's likely, I can't say what the Licensure Commission is going to do, but that we could find a solution to help us with the 3-year special non-renewable license, as well as another avenue or 2 to help districts have licensed staff.
What I hear you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that given time that you're going to fix this. Right, I think
as long as the Licensure Commission approves it. I mean, I can't speak for the members of the Licensure Commission, but we as staff, Dr. Murphy and his team have a proposal to make to the Licensure Commission. But again, with those timelines, your board materials are due to you on November the 1st with the agenda set, and then the Licensure Commission is November the 3rd, and then our board meeting for November just happens to be a week earlier.
So what we could do is just mail it out the next day. We'll just email it the next day, or call Mr. Franklin to come, whoever wants to come pick it up, but we can send the email out the following the commission meeting.
It's going to get fixed.
It's being worked on. Yeah. Okay. Did you make that in the form of a motion, or was that?
I did, but given what she just said, I'll hold this.
Rescind your motion?
I'll rescind it right now until give them a chance to take it before the license. My whole thing is, when I got that report and read it, there's one of us out there. That lady works for this board and this department. And we took a tool away from her that she's utilized in trying to get better folks in her classroom. A lot of these districts, they have 2 choices. They can either look for alternate ways to get certification or get certified people in there, or they can use long-term substitutes, which I don't think anybody thinks is a good idea or a good option, So all we did was took a tool. It wasn't like we knew that, but we'd just taken a tool out of her hands, one that she had used very effectively and efficiently the year before, and then at the last minute, she can't wait till July to hire folks. She gets a notification that you can't do what you did last year, and that created a concern. So.
The next one is board procedures.
Altman and I talked about this months ago, and I called you one day when we were okay. And what I think that would be a better thing to do, because I got multiple subheadings under this, is instead of putting it to a vote today, let's just throw this out for discussion and thinking, and then come back next month and deal with it, if you don't mind. Would that be okay? The first piece of it is communication. And this is what I started our conversation. I was looking for information, and I want to say this publicly to everybody. I have called this department on numerous occasions and asked for help on certain issues that I was concerned about to get information to make better decisions here. And everybody has always been very gracious and accommodated me and helped me. And one time I was trying to get information to present to the board about the cost of the subject area test. And out of that came back an email that any information sought like that would have to be shared with everybody, and which was fine with me. I wasn't trying to get any special treatment. And Ms. Altman and I talked about that, and she said, well, let's work on it. And she and I had been proctors out in Clinton on the test, and we had a conversation that day. And what I would like for us to do is look at on communication to the board. You've heard me already say, let's figure out some way that we can try to have, for every issue that we deal with, information ahead of time that we can study or seek help from department staff or whatever to make a better vote or pass better policy. So how do we, let's try to keep from having agenda items that don't have backup material is one. And the other thing, any briefings or anything else that any member on this board gets has to be shared with everybody. Second thing on the agenda, we have gone, at one time we've gone from now, most of our agenda, we have 4 or 5 items, and then we have a consent agenda. And my first question is, what's the difference between action and consent? Who decides, and why did we go to that? Because just like today, we've got, what, 4 issues, and then how many consent agenda items?
Well, I think if you recall,
9.
oh, excuse me, I'm sorry.
9 consent agenda items. See? And of course, I always ask for a lot of, because if any of the staff come forward and present an action item, then we have a chance to question and all that stuff. But if we don't ask for it, then we don't get that chance on a consent agenda item, Are the consent agenda items less important, or?
Are you asking for a response?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, if you remember when we had that full day training with Mike Waldrop from the Mississippi, Association, School Board Association, it was his recommendation that we keep the main thing on the agenda, and any of the minutia around contracts or EIR or an appointment to this commission or appointment to that commission, something that wasn't the main thing should be thrown to consent. Consent's still an action item, but the idea was that the focus of the conversation at the state board would be around everything that really basically impacts our strategic plan, and that all other items would be thrown to consent, and so that we would have more time at the board to discuss the most important things.
And the next thing I was going to throw out, and this is going to really go, I would, and I want to applaud you, and I told you this before, I really applaud you mainstreaming our board meetings. Now, practitioners that are out there has an opportunity to hear what we're discussing and the things that we're discussing that impact them and what they do every day. So I applaud you for doing that. But how are we going to utilize that now to impact what we're doing? And like before, when I got on the board, we met on Thursday for work session. Then we had Thursday afternoon, Thursday night to get further clarification or involve or make calls to people that we trusted out there and said, how is this going to impact you? And that type thing. So I'd like to see us consider going back to meeting on Thursday and Friday. Now, Dr. Kelly, you have a lot further to drive and that type thing, as does Dr. Elam and that kind of thing. It's pretty easy for me to meet 2 days, but anyway, but I guess where I'm trying to go with this is, how do we shape our meetings and our agendas and so forth so that the practitioners have a chance to have input before we pass it, just like in this case with the doing away with the 3-year licensure, We passed it, and I had no idea that what the impact was going to be, and then that was the impact. And then the last thing I want us to think about is, I really would like to see us spend some time defining Miss Amos's role as far as her reporting to the board and what our responsibilities are. But if we can define what it is we expect of her, I would like to see us do that, because that hadn't been done since I've been on here.
Above and beyond what's in statute, because her job is defined in statute.
As a job,
That's a statutorily defined job.
Her reporting to the board. I've not one time have I known that we've entered into discussion saying, let's instruct Sonia. Like the chore she's dealing with now is on the procedures and all, but that was assigned by you, not us.
No. She's right now involved with the state auditor and the audit that he's involved with, just like he's been involved. But that's one of her roles, is to be the liaison between anybody that's in auditing the department.
I would like to have a clear understanding of, if she reports to us, I'd like for everybody to understand what that means. And
right, but I'm saying, are you asking above and beyond what's in statutes? What I'm asking, because her role and her job is defined in statute. So are you wanting to add to that? I'm just trying to get clarity.
I'd just like to get clarity on that. Yes, ma'am. It's just like, when I was going through and reading some of the reports, it said, that in your words, you said she reports to the board, but we have not, and I've known that since way back, but I don't know of any time that we have done anything as a board to define or to assign her certain responsibilities.
Well, that was one of the things that Dr. Kelly mentioned earlier, that the accountability subcommittee is the one that takes a look at her annual plan of audits that she intends to do, approves that, and she goes about doing her work based on what the subcommittee and whoever chaired the subcommittee at the time. Since I've been here, that's been what's been done, regardless of whether it was Todd that was in the job or whether it was Sonia that's in the job, that she and her team put together along with the leadership team, because we may have an audit that we want done, of a particular program. And so she asks us, and then she also puts together the things that she thinks need to be done, and then that annual plan goes to the subcommittee for approval. So that's the board's committee, and that's the board's policy, if you will.
Helpful to all of the board members is if when the subcommittee looks at the annual plan, that annual plan comes to the
Pushed out.
Good idea.
Yeah, and that's
a
what we
good idea.
Yeah.
What you want to see looked at on any given fiscal year.
Maybe it's my fault, Dr. Kelly, because like I don't know what you brought, but I don't remember us dealing with Sonia since I've been on here. You know. Here's the thing. Now, what I do is when we do subcommittee report outs, usually we say just like with us. Now we met and had a good meeting yesterday, and Dr. Elam did a good job reporting it out. But then we say, well, you're going to hear more about this, you know. Maybe
he has given reports
maybe
to
just
this
need to be
board
a lot
on
more attentive
numerous
to what he's
occasions.
doing, you know.
You know all those little colored folders we get? A lot of that comes from Sonia. But anyway, but yes, we can push. I mean, we'll just be reminded to push out that annual plan to everybody when she comes. Mr.
I
Bailey?
just promise you I'll be a lot more attentive of when you do your subcommittee report.
And let me ask, have those been available through SharePoint? With some of the audit reports available through SharePoint at some point in time?
That's a good question. And can you, yes, I'm seeing nods from the team. I don't know. Sonia's usually, I think she's working with another group. But we can certainly find that out. Yeah.
I think they are already.
I
So
think
if
they
you
are.
wanted
I think
access
you're right.
to them, then you would have
Because everything
automatic
that she
access.
does has been posted. So it's pretty transparent.
But for example, though, now, like with the OSA, I mean, that is consuming her time that, of course, obviously doesn't come from us or doesn't come from someone else in the department. I mean, when you've had people in here for 28 weeks, that's takes up all of our time.
And
so.
we've had the department since April of 16 to date. We are now either on our 5th or 6th audit. And Sonia is the one that oversees all of those audits.
In statute that she oversees that, or it couldn't be Dr.
That's what she was talking about her liaison, or part of her responsibility is to be the liaison between the auditors and the department.
That is defined in the duties and responsibilities.
Yeah, it is.
I can get that over to you, Mr. Franklin, or
I can ask.
I can send everybody a copy.
Okay, please. Thank you. And the last thing is on contract issued by MDE. And we got a lot of information today, and when I say this, but I would like to see us, and I've thought about this, and y'all have heard me bring up questions and so forth, you know, but I'd like for us to, any contract that is issued through this department and this agency, that it goes through a competitive process before it can be entered into and issued and funded. And I'm not prescribing the competitive process, because you got bids, you got RFPs, and now you've got the new things that Dr. Gavin told us this morning. Taxpayers and folks for the most efficient use of the dollars, I'd like to see that we require that.
I think we can probably have Dr. Gavin address that at the next meeting too, because I mean, to be honest with you, that's not a real practical thing to do, because it really would slow the agency down to a crawl, and B, as one of the board members that I was having a conversation with about this said, then we're going to be stuck with whoever it is that wins the bid, and it may or may not be somebody that knows what they're doing. But they could be go ahead and put in the bid, and since after July 1, 35% of the money is going to count for money, and I'm Joe Blow who knows nothing about this, but I'm going to put in a really great bid, and I'm going to come in at $1,000 when somebody that knows what they're doing is going to come in at $10,000, and I'm stuck with a $1,000 bid who knows nothing about what they're doing. And that's the risk you take by doing something like that.
I'll make my notes here.
I don't know about MDE as an agency. More statute as it applies to municipalities. And for municipalities, state statute clearly defines at what threshold we have to get a competitive bid. And anything under that, unless it's professional services, like engineering or architects, we don't have to get competitive bids, so that most often we do, but we don't. But it's clearly defined in state statute.
Has benchmarks of cost, yeah.
But I don't know whether that is laid out in state statute
Well,
or MDE or not.
and some
It
of
is.
the-
Felicia says it is.
Yeah, And some of the comments that Dr. Gavin made this morning, when we get new guidelines from DFA after the first of the year, some of this may be addressed in it because the new law may address some of that. Okay. Anything else? Yeah. Okay. We will now go to consent agenda. And the first one is item A. This is to revise state board policy part 3. Chapter 40, Rule 40.1. This relates to homeless education.
I saw Quentin earlier. Oh, there he is. I'm sorry, didn't see you.
And you have a question about that. At the table.
Concern that I had was, and it's partly from a practical standpoint, but a homeless person can pick and choose what school they attend in a district. Nobody else necessarily can. You know, you got folks that are going to schools in districts that wish they had the opportunity to do that. I got a call 2 weeks ago about some folks in Madison County that wish they had an option, you know. But here, a homeless person, if I read this correctly, is they can pick and choose. Whatever their parent says, I want my child to go to that school, that's where they go. And I don't think, from a practical standpoint, they may be, and we have to provide transportation, so they may be bused past several other schools to go to the one that their parent chooses, and I don't think that's very practical. So
if I'm homeless, so I may be in one district tonight and another one the next night.
Well, I guess they picked a district that they plug into, you know, but it's not like you're like most folks are.
They don't have a physical address for you to.
Most folks are stuck with their zip code, you know.
Yeah,
so.
that's true.
Quentin,
So-
go ahead and address that.
So you're correct in that children or unaccompanied youth that enroll in school districts that are homeless, they have the right to choose. There is a dispute process, this process that's before you. Should a parent choose to go through that dispute process because a district will not enroll them or because a district refuses to enroll them in the school that they've requested, then they can go through that process and resolve that difference of opinion through that dispute process. But the purpose of that, Mr. Franklin, is when children lose their home, the legislation and the mindset of the U.S. Department of Education is school is the most normal part of their day. So if their home school should be Ridgeland Elementary, and because they're now homeless, they're living with a grandmother in Canton, then that student should be allowed to enroll and attend Ridgeland Elementary, where their classmates are and where the teachers are before they were in a position of not being homeless.
Into the school to where they have been enrolled, as opposed to saying they can choose. What if they decided they wanted to go to Madison Station?
Well, it just depends on the reason they chose to go to Madison Station. There are many variables when you're looking at these families that are homeless.
Privileges to these kids, it seems to me like on the surface.
Is
So
this,
go
sorry,
ahead.
is this language regulated, federal regulation?
This is the federal requirement. Yes,
There's no
ma'am.
reason for us to argue about
Right.
it because we can't do anything about that.
And that's why the dispute process.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. It's all federal law.
Okay, what
Federal law, what are we voting on today to do?
Dispute process.
the dispute process is what you're,
State must have a dispute process for parents to go through.
item F, well, that's not y'all though. Dr. Vanderford, item F. To revise state board policies. Chapter 14, Rules 14.6. You have your question, Mr. Franklin? You're on F.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. My question was, why are we changing this, and what does this improve, and who requested the change? Because most of it's dealing with changing timelines.
The initial rationale, which is on page 15. We had a number of districts that were calling and questioning our Appendix C form and the timeline that they had in which to file the Appendix C. And as you can see, it says before you see the red, it said the date of the infraction or the conviction. And so because districts have to report within a 10-day timeline and they may not have concluded their investigation, districts were leery about filing an Appendix C form that may not have merit, and then that form being requested through a public records request, or us have to indicate that an educator has had a conviction or committed an infraction. So in conversations with the district superintendents and principals, and then we were asked to join MSBA's legal counsel session, the decision was made that if we would revise the form to say the date of the allegation or the infraction or conviction, that districts would feel more comfortable signing their name to a report knowing that they have not concluded an investigation if it's an allegation rather than a conviction. And so from that, there were other tweaks that we needed to make in the policy to make the policy more clear. And at the guidance of the Licensure Commission, they asked Ms. Meyer to go through the policy and make any suggested revisions to the policy. But that was the initial rationale for even opening the policy for revisions.
Okay. All right, now let's go to our action items. Do we have a motion to approve item 2, which comes from the Office of Chief Operations Officer? We have 2A and 2B. Do we have a motion to approve those?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Item 3, we have, this is the grant awards. We have item 3A, which is the competitive school improvement grants, the SIG grants. This comes from the Office of Chief Academic Officer. Do we have a motion related?
Item 3.
Second. 3A, because we're going to vote on B separately. Okay, 3A. Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. All right. Item 3B, this is a criteria for the Achievement School District. Do we have a motion to approve that as presented? Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Ayes, 2 noes. I will vote in favor. So it would be 3-2. I do. Did you vote for Dr. Eagle?
No.
Okay, so you're
I'm
abstaining? Okay, she's abstaining. Abstentions go with the prevailing side. Okay, item 4, Office of the Chief Accountability Officer.
Did that pass?
Yes, it did. I chair, when it's 2-2,
Right.
chair votes. Item 4 is the Office of Chief Accountability Officer. This is approval of the 2016-17 statewide accountability results. Do we have a motion to approve the accountability results?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Item 7 is the consent agenda items. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, E, and J. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented? All right, is there a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. All right, now we will entertain a motion for executive session. Do we have a motion that relates to executive session?
Madam Chair, I move that the board consider making a closed determination of the need to go into executive session.
Have a motion. Is there a second to that?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, do we have a motion that we enter executive session?
You
We want to clear the room
Until everybody
first?
leaves.
Yeah, okay.